Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the gritty reality of being a gladiator trainer. Not the Hollywood version, you know, but a world where the promise of glory was often overshadowed by the harsh truth of managing men who lived and died by the sword. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. In the bustling heart of ancient Rome, where senators strutted around in togas, and the Colosseum cast its shadow over the city like a perpetual sundial, there existed a rather peculiar profession: the gladiator trainer. Now, these weren't just your average gym coaches, barking orders at a bunch of lycra-clad fitness enthusiasts. No, these were the masters of life or death, tasked with turning slaves, prisoners, and unfortunate souls into the entertainment equivalent of a Roman blockbuster. Gladiator trainers, or Lannisti as they were called, found themselves in a role that was part talent scout, part drill sergeant, and part ringmaster. And boy, did it come with its own set of challenges. To put it bluntly, being a gladiator trainer was like owning a sports team where the players often ended up very, very dead. Imagine trying to maintain a roster with that kind of turnover rate. The economic stakes were high. Gladiators, much like today's professional athletes, didn't come cheap. Let's talk numbers. Feeding a gladiator was a hefty expense. A single fighter could chow down on about 4,000 calories a day. That's roughly the equivalent of 16 Big Macs. Multiply that by a dozen or more fighters, and your grocery bill starts looking less like a list and more like the GDP of a small country. The costs didn't stop at food. Gladiators required equipment: helmets, shields, swords, and armor. And let's not forget the upkeep of the ludus, the training school, which needed to be as robust as the fighters themselves. This was no mom-and-pop operation. This was big business with a big budget. The expenses were so staggering that a Lannister could easily find themselves juggling the books like a circus act, trying to keep the financial plates spinning while ensuring their fighters didn't end up as part of the Colosseum's bloody floor show. But why all this effort? Because a successful gladiator could bring in the big bucks. A well-trained fighter could be the star of the show, drawing crowds as effectively as a modern-day rock star fills a stadium. The Roman elite loved their games, and a Lannister with a knack for producing champions could make a tidy profit. Of course, there was always the risk of the ultimate flop, a fighter who was all bark and no bite, a costly dud who would inevitably meet an untimely end, leaving his trainer with nothing but debts and a vacancy to fill. Navigating the whims of Roman society was akin to walking a tightrope over a pit of lions. The Lannister had to keep the wealthy sponsors happy while also ensuring that their fighters were ready for the arena's brutal demands. It was a delicate balancing act, like spinning plates on top of a galloping horse. The stakes were high, and the risks were real. But the allure of glory and gold was enough to keep the wheels turning, even as the trainers themselves often faced disdain from the very society that relied on them for entertainment. And then there's the small matter of motivation. How do you inspire a group of individuals who know that their next performance might be their last? It's not exactly like convincing someone to give their best at a corporate retreat. The trainers had to be part coach, part psychologist, and part motivational speaker. They had to sell the dream of glory and fame, even if it came with a hefty dose of danger. Despite the romanticized image we often have of gladiators and their trainers, the reality was decidedly less glamorous. It was a gritty, grim business where the stakes were life and death. The Colosseum might have been the grand stage, but behind the scenes, the world of gladiator training was a relentless grind of sweat, blood, and tears. Yet, for all the hardships, there was a certain appeal to the life of a Lannister, an opportunity to brush shoulders with the powerful, to play a role in the grand spectacle of Roman entertainment, and maybe, just maybe, to carve out a fortune amidst the chaos. So next time you find yourself caught up in the spectacle of ancient Rome, spare a thought for the unappreciated Lannister. They were the unsung architects of the gladiatorial games, the behind-the-scenes maestros orchestrating the ultimate drama of life and death. It was a tough job, but someone had to do it, and often they did it with a wry smile, a keen eye, and a wallet that was just as likely to be emptied as filled. The Lannister, those unsung architects of ancient Rome's bloodiest productions, lived a life that was as exhausting as it was exhilarating. From the crack of dawn, the training grounds of a ludus would echo with the sounds of clashing swords, grunts of exertion, and the occasional thud of someone hitting the dirt hard. This was the gladiator trainer's daily grind, a relentless cycle of molding men into warriors, all while juggling the expectations of Roman society and the bottom line. You see, the Lannisters' lot wasn't just about turning out a good fighter. It was about crafting a spectacle the crowds would crave. The training regimens these trainers oversaw were grueling, to say the least. We're talking about a workout regimen that would make your modern CrossFit session look like a leisurely stroll. Gladiators were drilled in weapons skills, hand-to-hand combat, and tactical maneuvers, all under the watchful eye of their Lannister who, no doubt, had a keen eye for spotting both potential and peril. Historical records tell us that these trainers were often former gladiators themselves, seasoned by years of surviving the very arena they now prepared others to face. They knew the stakes, and they knew that every fighter who entered the arena was, in a way, a reflection of their own expertise, or lack thereof. The Lannister had to be a master of psychology as well as physical training. Imagine trying to motivate a group of men who knew that their next fight could very well be their last. It wasn't just about building muscle. It was about building morale. The trainers used a mix of incentives and intimidation, promising freedom and glory to those who excelled, while simultaneously reminding them of the grim reality of failure. After all, in the arena, it wasn't just about winning. It was about surviving to fight another day. And then there was the pressure to produce fighters who could not only survive but thrive. The more successful the gladiator, the greater the profits for the trainer. This wasn't just a matter of personal pride. It was a financial necessity. A victorious gladiator was a valuable asset, one that could attract wealthy patrons and fill the stands with eager spectators. But failure had its costs, both literal and figurative. A trainer with too many losses could find their reputation in ruins, their fighters overlooked, and their coffers empty. There's something inherently absurd about training men to face death for sport, and the Lannister were well aware of this dark irony. They operated within a societal paradox where life was both incredibly cheap and incredibly valuable, depending on which side of the arena you stood. The Lannister had to navigate this twisted landscape with shrewdness and strategy, ensuring that they stayed on the right side of the ledger. Historical anecdotes lend us insight into the peculiarities of this profession. Take, for example, the story of Gaius Appuleius Diocles, a legendary charioteer from the Roman Empire. While not a gladiator, Diocles' career earned him a fortune equivalent to today's millions. His success shows the lucrative potential for those who could master the spectacle. Similarly, the Lannister who managed to produce successful gladiators could find themselves rubbing shoulders with the elite, their fortunes rising with each victorious bout. Yet the harsh truth remained. For every rising star, there were countless others who met their end in the arena, and their trainers had to pick up the pieces and start anew. The constant cycle of training, fighting, and replacing fallen fighters took a physical and mental toll on the trainers. The Lannister had to maintain a balance between empathy and detachment, forging bonds with their fighters while remaining prepared for the inevitable losses. It was a delicate dance, one that required a keen understanding of human nature and an unwavering focus on the harsh realities of their world. In Rome, where the line between life and death was as thin as a gladiator's blade, the Lannister had to be ever vigilant, ever resourceful, and ever ready to adapt to the whims of fate and fortune. They were the ultimate multitaskers, managing not only the physical and mental well-being of their fighters, but also their own reputations and livelihoods. It was a tough job, and it was certainly not for the faint of heart. Despite the romanticized image of the gladiatorial games, the reality was far less glamorous. Behind the scenes, the trainers labored tirelessly to maintain their fighters and their reputations. They were the unsung heroes, or perhaps the unsung villains, of the arena, a role that demanded resilience, resourcefulness, and a touch of ruthlessness. As we continue to explore the world of the Lannister, we'll uncover even more of the gritty, grim realities they faced in their quest to conquer the Colosseum. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over. As the dust settled on another day's grueling training session, the Lannister knew that their work extended far beyond the confines of the ludus. These gladiator trainers were not just gym rats with a penchant for swinging swords. They were political tightrope walkers, dancing on the thin line between celebrated success and catastrophic ruin. Welcome to the thrilling, yet perilous world of Roman politics and social dynamics, where the Lannister found themselves rubbing elbows with senators and patrons, all while trying to keep their heads above water. In the grand theatre of Roman society, gladiatorial games were more than just blood-soaked entertainment. They were an essential part of the political toolkit. A well-timed spectacle could curry favor with the masses or distract them from a particularly unpopular decision. And guess who stood at the center of this strategic maneuvering? Our good friends, the Lannister. These trainers were often courted by politicians who sought to use the games as a means to an end, whether it was to bolster their own popularity or to undermine a rival. This wasn't just about sports, it was about power. Take the infamous Marcus Licinius Crassus, for example. Known as one of Rome's wealthiest men, Crassus wasn't just a real estate mogul. He was a master of political machinations. He famously funded a series of gladiatorial games to win over the Roman populace and cement his status as a key player in the political arena. The Lannister who worked with him found themselves in a precarious position. Aligning with a powerful patron like Crassus could elevate a trainer's status and fill their coffers, but it also came with strings attached. One wrong move, and they could find themselves on the outs, their fortunes as fleeting as a gladiator's victory. A Lannister's relationship with patrons and politicians was a delicate dance of power, influence, and sometimes outright manipulation. The wealthy patricians who bankrolled the games were like the NFL team owners of their day, except with more togas and fewer salary caps. They demanded results, and they expected their investments to pay off in the form of public adulation or political leverage. As the middlemen in this high-stakes game, the Lannister had to manage not only the expectations of these demanding patrons, but also the logistics of training and maintaining their fighters. But the balancing act didn't stop there. A Lannister's standing could hinge on the performance of a single fighter. A victorious gladiator could catapult a trainer into the upper echelons of Roman society, while a string of losses could send them tumbling into obscurity. Fame and infamy were two sides of the same coin, and the Lannister found themselves flipping it on a daily basis. The stakes were high, and the pressure was relentless. Consider the case of Quintus Hilarianus, a Lannister who reached the height of popularity in Rome before falling into disgrace. Known for his stable of skilled fighters, Hilarianus managed to ingratiate himself with influential politicians and patrons. But his downfall came when a scandal rocked the games. Accusations of match-fixing and bribery left his reputation in tatters, and soon his fighters were avoided like the Roman plague. The lesson was clear. In the world of gladiator training, you could be riding high one moment and fighting for scraps the next. The myth of the all-powerful Lannister, a puppet master pulling the strings of Rome's most beloved spectacle, is just that, a myth. While they certainly wielded influence, their power was often overstated, a romantic narrative spun by those who marveled at their proximity to the glittering world of Roman politics. In reality, the Lannister were often at the mercy of forces far beyond their control, caught in the crossfire of political rivalries and economic pressures. They had to be shrewd negotiators and keen strategists, always one step ahead to survive in this unforgiving environment. And yet, despite the precariousness of their position, the allure of the arena was undeniable. The chance to be part of something grand, to play a role in the drama that captivated an entire civilization, was a siren call that many could not resist. The Lannistys straddled the line between legend and reality. There lives a testament to the complexity of Roman society. As we uncover more layers of the Lannisters' world, we'll continue to see how they navigated the volatile landscape of ancient Rome. From political intrigue to social dynamics, the story of these gladiator trainers is a fascinating glimpse into a world where the stakes were as high as the Colosseum's towering walls. The tale is far from over, and there's much more to explore as we delve deeper into the lives of the unsung architects of Rome's bloodiest spectacle. So, strap in. This historical roller coaster is just getting started. As we dig deeper into the economic labyrinth of the gladiatorial games, it's clear that being a Lannister was less like running a gym and more like juggling flaming swords while blindfolded. The financial stakes were high, with multiple revenue streams to tap into if you could navigate the pitfalls. First up, ticket sales. The Colosseum wasn't just a massive stone amphitheater. It was the epicenter of Roman entertainment, capable of seating around 50,000 to 80,000 roaring spectators. Now, getting a slice of the ticket sales pie was trickier than it sounds. Entry to the games was often free, sponsored by a wealthy politician seeking public favor. But the Lannistys could strike deals with these sponsors, securing payments for providing top-tier gladiators to ensure the games were a smashing, sometimes literally, success. And then there was betting. Oh, the betting. If you think Vegas is the capital of gambling, think again. The Romans invented the art of wagering, placing bets on everything from who would win the fight to how long a gladiator might last. Trainers, like modern-day sports managers, had to be keen-eyed about the odds. They might even place bets themselves, banking on their fighters to bring home the bacon. A well-timed bet could turn a modest income into a small fortune, but miscalculation could leave a trainer broke faster than you can say, Veni, Vidi, Vici. But let's not forget the merchandise, because who doesn't want a piece of the action? Successful gladiators were like ancient celebs, and savvy Lannistys capitalized on this, selling everything from small figurines to oil lamps bearing a fighter's likeness. Imagine today's sports memorabilia, but with a bit more blood and a lot more grit. Yet, for every Lannister who struck gold, there were those who hit rock bottom. Meet Aelius Marius, a trainer who gambled on a young fighter rumored to be the next big thing. Unfortunately, Marius's star pupil turned out to have more bark than bite, and after a series of devastating losses, Marius's financial backers pulled out faster than a chariot on a racetrack. His dreams of grandeur crumbled, and he was left with debts as hefty as a gladiator's armor. Contrast this with the story of Marcus Attilius, a Lannister who, despite starting with a ragtag group of fighters, managed to build a reputation for producing champions. His secret, a keen eye for talent and an uncanny ability to read the crowd. Attilius knew when to push his fighters and when to hold them back, ensuring they peaked at just the right moment. His fighters went on to win numerous bouts, and his school attracted wealthy patrons eager to invest in his rising stars. The marketplace of the Colosseum was a cutthroat environment, where one misstep could lead to financial ruin, but a savvy play could result in unimaginable wealth. The economic incentives were enormous, but the risks were equally daunting, a fact that kept Lannistys perpetually on edge. They had to be part economist, part risk-taker, and always ready to adapt to the ever-changing tides of popularity and prowess. Despite the grim realities, the allure of the arena persisted. There was something intoxicating about the spectacle, the chance to be part of something larger than life. The Lannistys, often seen as the puppet masters of this blood-soaked theatre, knew that their power and influence were as fleeting as a gladiator's fame. They danced on the edges of fortune and failure, their fortunes tied to the whims of fate and public favor. And so, the tale of the Lannistys continues, a complex tapestry of ambition, strategy, and survival. As we delve further into their world, we'll uncover more about the intricate web of relationships and rivalries that defined this perilous profession. The stakes were high, and the drama was never-ending. a testament to the enduring human fascination with risk, reward, and the relentless pursuit of glory. Stay tuned, because the next act in this historical drama promises to be as riveting as the last. As we shift gears from the gritty world of ancient Rome, it's time to reflect on what the Lannistri have left behind in the dusty corridors of history and the glittering realms of popular culture. These gladiator trainers, with their shrewd business acumen and hardened resolve, were the unsung orchestrators of Rome's most blood-curdling spectacles. Yet, despite their crucial role, they often remain overshadowed by the very fighters they trained. So why does the allure of the Lannister persist? And how would these historical figures fare in today's arena of sports and entertainment? First off, let's debunk the myth that these trainers were mere background players. In reality, the Lannistri were the power brokers of the ancient world, much like today's sports agents, who negotiate million-dollar deals with the finesse of a poker player bluffing with a royal flush. While the gladiators drew the crowds with their feats of bravery or sheer survival instinct, depending on whom you ask, the Lannistri were the ones pulling the strings. They were the talent scouts, the coaches, and the managers all rolled into one, ensuring every swing of the sword and clash of the shield was executed with precision. Without them, the games would have been little more than a chaotic brawl. The image of the Lannister has morphed over the centuries, thanks in no small part to Hollywood's romanticized portrayals. In movies, these trainers are often depicted as grizzled veterans with hearts of gold, the kind of guys who'd give a pep talk that make even the most jaded fighter believe in miracles. But the historical reality was often far less sentimental. The Lannistri were pragmatic, sometimes ruthless, individuals who understood that sentimentality had no place in the business of blood sports. They were as likely to be motivated by profit margins as by any notion of camaraderie or honor. Despite this, the fascination with their world endures, perhaps because it taps into a universal truth about human nature, our penchant for spectacle. From the roaring crowds of the Colosseum to the packed stadiums of today's sports events, the thrill of competition and the drama of victory and defeat continue to captivate audiences. The Lannistri, with their knack for staging the ultimate showdown, understood this better than anyone. They knew that a well-fought match was not just about survival. It was about crafting a narrative that would keep the audience on the edge of their stone seats. So, how would these ancient impresarios fare in today's world? Imagine a Lannister navigating the modern sports industry, where agents and managers play a critical role in shaping careers and building brands. It's not such a leap. The Lannisters' skill set, talent scouting, training, strategic planning, translates well into the high-stakes world of professional sports. They'd likely have little trouble adapting to the modern landscape of endorsements, media appearances, and social media followings, perhaps even relishing the added complexity. Picture a Lannister in the boardrooms of today's sports leagues, negotiating contracts for athletes who, like their gladiatorial predecessors, are the stars of the show. The modern Colosseums are arenas and stadiums, and the currency is not just cash, but also public adulation and media coverage. As they did 2 millennia ago, today's sports managers must balance the interests of their athletes, the demands of sponsors, and the expectations of fans. The Lannistri, with their historical knack for balancing these competing interests, would fit right in. Yet, it's not just the practical skills that make the Lannistri relevant. Their legacy also prompts us to reconsider the nature of spectacle and the lengths to which society will go for entertainment. In Rome, the games served as a tool for political control and social cohesion, distracting the masses with displays of power and skill. Today, sports serve a similar function, providing a shared experience that can unite or divide vast audiences. The parallels are as striking as they are sobering. But let's not get too lost in the romance of it all. It's crucial to remember the grim truths behind the myth. The gladiatorial games were brutal, and the price of failure was often death. The Lannistri operated in a world where human life was expendable, a reality that casts a long shadow over their achievements. The spectacle was thrilling, yes, but it was also a stark reminder of the darker aspects of human nature. the fascination with violence, the exploitation of the vulnerable, and the relentless pursuit of profit. In the end, the story of the Lannister is a testament to the enduring human fascination with risk and reward. It's a tale of ambition, strategy, and survival, played out in the dusty arenas of ancient Rome and echoed in today's sports arenas. As long as we crave the thrill of competition and the drama of human endeavor, the legacy of the Lannister will continue to resonate, reminding us of the complex interplay between power, spectacle, and the human condition. So next time you cheer for your favorite team or marvel at an athlete's prowess, spare a thought for those ancient trainers who first understood the power of spectacle. In the grand theater of human history, they were the maestros of the ultimate drama, weaving tales of glory and defeat that still captivate our imaginations. And in a world that continues to celebrate the extraordinary, their legacy is unlikely to fade anytime soon. In the grand theater of history, The Silk Road was the original blockbuster hit, a sprawling epic that spanned continents, centuries, and civilizations. It's a tale of silk, spices, and some seriously savvy traders who turned a few dusty paths into the world's most famous trade network. Forget your GPS. These folks navigated thousands of miles with nothing but the stars and maybe a camel or two that refused to read the map. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's dig into how this whole phenomenon kicked off. The Silk Road wasn't born out of a sudden urge for Marco Polo to do a bit of globetrotting. Nope, it was a slow burn, starting around the 2nd century BCE when the Han dynasty in China decided that their silk was too fabulous to keep to themselves. Silk was the ancient equivalent of a viral TikTok trend. Everyone wanted it, and it spread faster than a cat video. The Chinese weren't just weaving fabric, they were spinning a web of demand across the known world. This lustrous, mysterious fabric glittered in the eyes of faraway Romans like a new iPhone launch. Now, why silk, you may ask? Well, silk wasn't just any fabric, it was the Beyoncé of textiles. Lightweight yet warm, strong yet smooth. This stuff was the gold standard. The Romans were so gaga over silk that Emperor Tiberius had to issue a decree limiting its use, claiming it was a tad too decadent for Roman senators. Talk about a dress code. Meanwhile, the Parthians and Kushans, those middlemen who controlled the trade routes, were rubbing their hands in glee, charging tolls like it was an ancient highway robbery. But silk was just the headline act. The Silk Road was a veritable smorgasbord of goods, ideas, and even germs. Yes, germs. As traders and travelers made their way from Chang'an, modern Xi'an, all the way to the Mediterranean, they weren't just carrying silk and spices. They were unwittingly transporting everything from religion to the plague. The route was a super-spreader event before the term even existed. Thanks a lot, Yersinia pestis. Traversing the Silk Road wasn't your average Sunday drive. This was a journey that could take months, even years, and required the kind of grit that makes running a marathon seem like a walk in the park. The terrain was as varied as it was unforgiving. From the sun-scorched sands of the Taklamakan Desert, where the name literally means you can get in, but you can't get out, to the icy passes of the Pamirs, affectionately known as the roof of the world, travelers had to be part explorer, part survivor. Innovative as they were, traders didn't embark on these journeys blindly. Caravans, those ancient convoys of camels and goods, were the logistical brainchildren that made it all possible. Picture it. 100 camels laden with silk, spices, and the occasional sack of precious stones, plodding methodically across the landscape. Each camel could carry up to 500 pounds of goods, making them the semi-trucks of their day. And let's not forget the caravanserais, the OG motels dotting the route, where weary travelers could catch a break and swap tales of daring barter deals and close shaves with bandits. Speaking of bandits, the Silk Road was not without its hazards. The threat of marauders loomed large, eager to relieve traders of their precious cargo. Protection was essential, and this is where the power dynamics of the region played a crucial role. Empires like the Tang and the Sassanid weren't just sitting pretty. Controlling the Silk Road meant controlling wealth, influence, and the ever-persistent desire for that luscious Chinese silk. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. The Silk Road was no utopia of peaceful exchange. Behind the scenes, it was a battleground of economic competition and political maneuvering. The Han dynasty might have started the silk craze, but it took the collaboration, and often confrontation, of countless empires, tribes, and cultures to keep it going. The road was a geopolitical chessboard, with each player leveraging their position to extract maximum value. Perhaps the most underrated aspect of the Silk Road was its role as a conduit for cultural exchange. Ideas flowed as freely as goods. Buddhism, for instance, hitched a ride from India to China, transforming as it went. Art, language, and even culinary practices were swapped like trading cards. It's no exaggeration to say that the Silk Road was a catalyst for globalization long before anyone knew what that meant. And so, the Silk Road stands as a testament to human ingenuity and greed, ambition and folly, a network that shaped the world in ways both visible and invisible. Silk may have been the star, the glamorous face of the operation, but the true legacy of the Silk Road is the rich tapestry of human interaction it wove. As we continue this journey into its depths, remember that this ancient network was more than just trade routes. It was a lifeline, an artery that pumped the blood of civilization across continents. This was not just a road. It was the world's first information superhighway, long before the internet was a twinkle in humanity's eye. So if silk was the shimmering star of this ancient network, what about its supporting cast? Enter spices, the culinary celebrities of the Silk Road. These weren't just flavor enhancers. They were luxury items that could make or break a trade deal. Imagine trading a pile of cinnamon sticks for a small fortune. Black pepper was so valuable it was known as black gold. And let's not even start on saffron, worth its weight in gold and then some. Now that's a salad dressing with some serious street cred. The spice trade was, in many ways, the original foodie movement, centuries before you could snap a pic of your avocado toast. But the Silk Road wasn't just about trading tangible goods. It was a cultural exchange on steroids. Ideas and philosophies traveled alongside silk and spices, transforming societies. Buddhism, for example, didn't just hitch a ride. It practically bought a season pass. From its heartland in India, it spread through Central Asia to China, evolving with each border it crossed. The Silk Road was like a philosophical buffet, offering an all-you-can-eat spread of ideas that shaped civilizations. And let's not overlook the linguistic symphony that was the Silk Road. Traders, scholars, and scribes engaged in a veritable babel of languages. From Chinese dialects to Persian and Greek, the road was a crash course in foreign language acquisition. The exchange wasn't just about learning a few phrases to ask for the nearest caravanserai. It was about adopting entire scripts. The Kushans, for example, used the Greek script to write their language, a testament to the cultural fusion that was the Silk Road's hallmark. We've got to talk about the economic engine that made all this possible. The Silk Road was the original influencer marketplace. No hashtags required. Merchants needed to be as savvy as they were adventurous, navigating not just deserts and mountains, but the complex web of trade agreements and tariffs. A single strand of silk could indeed be worth more than gold, but it also came with a price tag of political maneuvering and economic strategy. And let's not sugarcoat it. The Silk Road wasn't all enlightened exchange and economic prosperity. It had its fair share of skullduggery. Smuggling was rampant, particularly when it came to those precious silk threads. The Chinese, keen to maintain their monopoly, guarded the secrets of silk production as if it were the nuclear codes. Anyone caught trying to smuggle silkworm eggs or mulberry seeds faced punishments that were, shall we say, less than lenient. But for all its flaws, the Silk Road was a beacon of human connectivity. It was a network that, despite its challenges, brought people together in a way that was unprecedented. You could argue it was the first true experiment in globalization, centuries before the term would become a buzzword. The road wasn't just a path to wealth. It was a conduit for the exchange of human experience. And while the Silk Road was a marvel of human ingenuity, it was also a testament to our penchant for conflict. The control of trade routes was a constant Game of Thrones, with empires rising and falling over the right to levy tolls and taxes. The Sogdians, for instance, were the power brokers of the Silk Road's heyday, a merchant class that wielded influence far beyond their numbers. They were the ancient world's equivalent of venture capitalists, investing in caravans and reaping the rewards. So, as we navigate the twists and turns of this ancient network, remember this. The Silk Road was more than a series of dusty paths. It was a living, breathing entity that connected the human race in ways that were both profound and pragmatic. Each merchant, monk, and marauder added their thread to the tapestry, weaving a story that was as diverse as it was interconnected. As we continue to unravel this saga, keep in mind that the Silk Road was a journey, not just a destination, a testament to the enduring spirit of exploration and exchange that defines us all. The Silk Road wasn't just a dusty network of paths. It was a geopolitical puppet master pulling the strings of empires. This wasn't a route for the faint-hearted or the lone wanderer with a penchant for camel selfies. Nope, this was a high-stakes game where alliances were forged, battles ignited, and fortunes made or lost faster than you could say spice trade. Think of it like the world's messiest group project, where everyone had a hidden agenda and nobody agreed on the final presentation. First stop on our political tour, the Han Dynasty. These guys were the original Silk Road influencers, setting the stage with their signature product, silk, naturally. The Han knew that controlling the Silk Road meant more than just economic clout. It was a way to flex their political muscles. By establishing trade with the Yuezhi, they effectively outmaneuvered the pesky Xiongnu, their nomadic nemesis. This was diplomacy with a side of silk, a classic case of my enemy's enemy is my friend. The Parthian Empire, meanwhile, served as the middlemen par excellence. They were the Silk Road's toll booth operators, charging fees like it was going out of style. In return, they offered protection, sort of like ancient insurance brokers, but with more swords and fewer spreadsheets. The Parthians mastered the art of playing both sides, maintaining a delicate balance between the Roman Empire in the west and the Han Dynasty in the east. They weren't just sitting pretty, they were orchestrating an intricate dance of diplomacy and trade that kept their empire afloat. But the Silk Road wasn't all about handshakes and high-fives. It was also a powder keg of conflict. The Romans, ever eager to get their hands on more silk, weren't exactly fond of their Parthian neighbors. Tensions boiled over more than once, leading to epic showdowns like the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE, where Roman legions were soundly thrashed by Parthian cavalry. It was a brutal reminder that the Silk Road could be as deadly as it was lucrative. And let's not forget the Sassanid Empire, the Parthian successors. These guys were the Silk Road's new bouncers, and they didn't shy away from throwing their weight around. By the 3rd century, they had solidified control over key trade routes, and they were more than willing to flex their military might to keep it that way. The Sassanids had a particular knack for squeezing the Romans, often engaging in border skirmishes that would make a modern-day corporate takeover look like a tea party. But the political impacts of the Silk Road weren't confined to the grand strategies of empires. They trickled down to the merchant class, the unsung heroes of this epic trade network. The Sogdians, those savvy middlemen we mentioned earlier, were the lifeblood of Silk Road commerce. They weren't just traders. They were diplomats, linguists, and cultural conduits. Their influence extended far beyond the marketplace, weaving a tapestry of alliances that transcended borders. The Sogdians were the glue that held the Silk Road together, a testament to the power of commerce as a unifying force. Yet, for all the tales of alliances and trade treaties, the Silk Road was also a battleground of banditry and betrayal. The romantic image of caravans plodding peacefully across the desert belies the harsh reality faced by traders. Bandits lurked around every corner, eager to relieve merchants of their valuable cargo. Protection money, or protection money, was the name of the game, and if you didn't pay up, you might find your goods mysteriously disappearing into the night. The reality was stark. Traversing the Silk Road was as much about survival as it was about commerce. The harsh landscapes, from the scorching sands of the Gobi Desert to the treacherous passes of the Hindu Kush, were as formidable as any bandit. It was a world where the line between merchant and marauder was often blurred, where trust was a rare commodity and alliances could turn on a dime. The Silk Road was a crucible of human ambition, where the stakes were as high as the peaks of the Pamirs. Despite the perilous journey, the political ramifications of the Silk Road were profound. It wasn't just a route for traders and travelers. It was a catalyst for empire building and diplomacy. The road's influence extended beyond mere economics, shaping the political landscape of entire regions. It was a testament to the interconnectedness of the ancient world, a reminder that even in an age without instant communication, the ties that bind us were as strong as ever. In the grand game of Silk Road politics, every player had their role to play. From emperors to envoys, merchants to marauders, each contributed to the complex web of alliances and conflicts that defined this ancient network. The Silk Road was a stage where the drama of history unfolded, a reminder that the pursuit of wealth and power often came with a hefty price. As we continue this journey through the annals of the Silk Road, remember that behind every strand of silk and every spice-laden camel, there was a story of ambition, intrigue, and survival. The Silk Road was more than a trade route. It was a reflection of the human spirit in all its glory and folly, a reminder that, in the end, we are all connected by the threads of history. Now, as we move from the theatrical intrigue of empires and their silk-laden caravans, let's fast forward to the part where everything starts to unravel. Picture the Silk Road in its twilight years, a bit like a beloved band past its prime, still trying to hit the high notes, but starting to miss the beat. The old routes that once buzzed with the chatter of traders and the clinking of camel bells were slowly being deserted, as if the desert sands themselves were swallowing them whole. So, what happened to this ancient network that once held the world in its thrall? The short answer is a cocktail of economic shifts, technological advancements, and the occasional bout of bubonic plague. For starters, the rise of maritime trade routes was like the invention of the smartphone, revolutionary, and suddenly everyone wanted in. Ships could carry more cargo than a caravan of camels and navigate the high seas faster than a caravan could trudge through the sand. It was all about efficiency, baby. The Silk Road wasn't exactly equipped to compete against this new maritime competition. With the development of the magnetic compass in China during the Song dynasty, 960–1279, sailors had a nifty little gadget that made sea navigation more reliable. And with the invention of the stern-mounted rudder, maneuvering those big old ships became a breeze. By the 15th century, the Portuguese were showing off their navigational prowess, while the Silk Road traders were left wondering where all the business went. To put it bluntly, the Silk Road was outclassed by maritime trade in the same way that a horse-drawn carriage is outclassed by a Ferrari. But it wasn't just the allure of the sea that spelled doom for the Silk Road. The Mongol Empire, which had once breathed new life into the route by providing unprecedented security, eventually fractured into squabbling khanates. This fragmentation turned the Silk Road into a patchwork of territories with different tolls, taxes, and more bandits than a Wild West film festival. It's hard to get your silk to Rome when every checkpoint is a potential shakedown. Oh, and did I mention the plagues? The Black Death, that charming little pandemic, made its way from the east to the west via the Silk Road in the 14th century, hitching a ride with fleas and rats. It was the ultimate unwelcome guest, decimating populations and shrinking markets faster than you could say quarantine. The trade routes became less of a bustling highway and more of a grim Reaper Express. With fewer people to trade and less demand for luxury goods like silk, the economic incentive to brave the dangers of the Silk Road just wasn't there anymore. Then there's the matter of supply and demand. By the time the Silk Road was on the decline, Europe was getting its silk fix from the Mediterranean. The Byzantines, clever cookies that they were, had smuggled silkworm eggs out of China in the 6th century, starting their own silk industry. Emperor Justinian, the mastermind behind this silk heist, probably didn't foresee that it would one day contribute to the Silk Road's decline. But there it was. Europe didn't need to look east anymore when it could produce its own silken treasures. And let's not forget that the Silk Road wasn't just a victim of external pressures. It was also a casualty of changing tastes. As European and Asian markets evolved, so did their appetites. Spices, once the rock stars of the trade routes, found themselves upstaged by new commodities like sugar and tobacco. These were the new kids on the block, demanding attention and reshaping global trade networks. In this shifting landscape, the once great Silk Road faded into the pages of history, a relic of a bygone era. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. The legacy of the Silk Road lived on, not just in the stories of silk and spices, but in the cultural and technological exchanges that had taken place over centuries. The route may have faded, but the connections it forged endured, influencing global trade and intercultural relations in ways that still echo today. So, as we reflect on the decline of this ancient network, let's not just mourn its passing. Instead, let's marvel at its transformation. The Silk Road was less a road and more a journey that paved the way for new beginnings in maritime trade, a journey that taught us that even in decline, there is opportunity for innovation and change. And as we prepare to delve into the final chapter of this saga, let's keep in mind that history, much like the Silk Road, is constantly evolving, always moving, never static, forever weaving the tapestry of human experience. And here we are, the last leg of our Silk Road journey, the grand finale of an ancient saga that reads like a blockbuster hit with a plot twist even Hollywood couldn't script. But fear not, this isn't just a tale of decline and dusty paths. It's about the legacy that keeps on kicking thousands of years later. So, buckle up, because this road still has a few miles left in it. First off, let's talk legacy, baby. The Silk Road was less about the miles of sand and more about the connections it wove, connections that refused to vanish like a Snapchat message. We're talking a legacy that's as sticky as your fingers after a summer popsicle, and it's left traces in your closet, your kitchen, and even your tech. Silk itself, once the fabric of emperors, is now a staple of luxury fashion, with a global industry worth over $30 billion annually. That's right. What started as an exclusive fabric for the elite is now woven into the fabric of our everyday lives. But let's dig deeper. Cultural exchanges didn't just stop at silk and spices. The Silk Road was a superhighway for ideas and innovation, a kind of ancient TED talk on wheels. It was the route that spread Buddhism across continents, transforming from a local Indian religion into a global spiritual movement. Today, Buddhism counts over 500 million followers worldwide, all thanks to a few monks who hitched a ride on a caravan. The next time you see a meditation app, remember, its roots were watered by camel dust and trader sweat. And then there's the culinary impact. Oh yes, the Silk Road spiced up more than just trade. It brought saffron, turmeric, and a whole spice rack of flavors into kitchens from Rome to Beijing. These weren't just condiments. They were culinary revelations that turned bland porridge into a feast. Fast forward to today, and you can't swing a cat in a modern kitchen without hitting a spice jar that owes its heritage to this ancient root. Cinnamon on your latte. Thank the Silk Road. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the myths versus the gritty reality. The Silk Road is often romanticized as a harmonious melting pot of cultures, a kind of ancient Arab experience where everyone got along swimmingly. But the truth is, it was as cutthroat as a reality TV show. Traders faced bandits, empires jostled for control, and the path was as much a battlefield as a bazaar. Yet the myths endure because they capture the imagination, painting a picture of adventure and exoticism that reality rarely matched. Romantic, sure. Realistic, not quite. Yet there's something to be said for the myths. They serve as a reminder of our innate desire to connect, to explore, to seek out the unknown. They fuel our wanderlust and our curiosity, even if the real Silk Road was more grit than glamour. The legends stick around because they speak to a deeper truth about human nature, our relentless pursuit of knowledge, and our ability to find common ground, even in the harshest of terrains. And let's not forget the technological ripples that still echo today. The Silk Road wasn't just about goods, it was a conduit for technological exchange. Paper, invented in China around the 2nd century BCE, spread westward along the route, revolutionizing communication. By the time Johannes Gutenberg printed his first Bible in the 15th century, the idea of paper had traveled thousands of miles, changing the course of history. In essence, the Silk Road was the original internet, spreading ideas faster than you can say, Google it. We should also pause to reflect on the economic lessons the Silk Road taught us. It was a demonstration of early globalization, where supply and demand dictated the flow of goods and wealth. The road was a living lesson in economic interdependence, showing us that no region is truly isolated, no matter how high its mountains or vast its deserts. This interconnectedness laid the groundwork for the global economy we know today, where a sneeze in one part of the world can send shockwaves through the stock market. So, here we are. The Silk Road may not be bustling with traders anymore, but its spirit lives on in our globalized world, a testament to the enduring power of human connection. It taught us that trade is more than just economics. It's about the exchange of ideas, cultures, and innovations that shape societies. The Silk Road was a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, greed, curiosity, and collaboration, a tapestry that continues to unfurl across the world. As we wrap up this journey, let's remember the Silk Road not just as a route, but as a symbol of the human spirit's resilience, its capacity for innovation, and its unyielding desire to connect. It was a path that carried more than just silk and spices. It carried the hopes and dreams of those who dared to traverse it. And while the sands of time have shifted, the lessons of the Silk Road remain, a reminder that, despite the challenges, we are all travelers on a journey, connected by the threads of history. So, the next time you sip your spiced chai or wrap yourself in a silky scarf, think of the Silk Road. Think of the traders who braved deserts and mountains, the monks who spread wisdom, and the cultures that intertwined along its paths. The Silk Road may have faded from the map, but its legacy is stitched into the fabric of our modern world, a legacy that continues to inspire, connect, and remind us of the incredible power of the journey. In the beginning, there were 2 brothers and a she-wolf. And no, this isn't the latest plot twist in a supernatural soap opera. We're talking about Romulus and Remus, the dynamic duo of Roman mythology, nursed by a Lupin surrogate mom in a tale that's as believable as a politician's tax return. This origin story, as much about family drama as it is about founding a civilization, sets the stage for the rise of one of history's most notorious political bodies, the Roman Senate. The legend goes that Romulus, the more ambitious of the pair, decided to build a city on the banks of the Tiber around 753 BCE. Naturally, he named it after himself, because why pass up a perfect branding opportunity? The tale of Rome's founding is a mix of ambition, fratricide, and a touch of zoology. But behind the myth lies a gritty truth about power and politics. Fast forward to 509 BCE, and Rome is having a major identity crisis. The city had endured a string of kings, some decent, others the kind of rulers who'd make you nostalgic for a tax audit. This royal drama culminated in the ousting of the last king, Tarquin the Proud, a guy whose surname wasn't exactly aspirational. His expulsion marked the end of the monarchy and the birth of the Roman Republic, a political experiment that would redefine governance for centuries. Enter the Roman Senate, stage left, originating as a council of elders known as senatus, which literally means old men. This assembly was initially a group of 300 aristocrats whose main qualification was their ability to stay awake through long debates. Picture them as the original influencers, wielding their clout not through Instagram, but through the equally addictive medium of legislation. These senators were the architects of Rome's policies, wielding power that would make today's lobbyists green with envy. In the early Republic, the Senate's responsibilities were as varied as they were critical. They advised on foreign policy, controlled financial matters, and even debated issues of war and peace. If you think modern politics is chaotic, try managing the affairs of a burgeoning empire with a communication system that relied on messengers faster than your average tortoise. Their influence extended to practically every corner of Roman life, from the mundane to the monumental. Senators were the ones who decided whether Rome should go to war or if they should just focus on building yet another aqueduct. Spoiler alert, they often chose both. While the Senate was a powerful force, its members were not exactly paragons of democracy. In a world where lineage counted more than merit, these political heavyweights were often more concerned with preserving their own power than with the will of the people. The Roman Senate was less about representing the average citizen and more about safeguarding the interests of Rome's elite. It was an exclusive club where the entry fee was a family name that could fill a library shelf. Despite its imperfections, the Senate was a revolutionary concept in its time. It was an attempt to balance power, a precursor to modern democratic systems, and a testament to the idea that governance could be something other than hereditary monarchy. Senators were the gatekeepers of the Roman state, and their decisions had ripple effects that reached far beyond the Mediterranean. The transition from monarchy to republic was no simple feat. It required a delicate dance of political maneuvering, public persuasion, and occasionally the strategic application of a dagger. The Senate had to navigate a landscape fraught with internal divisions and external threats, all while maintaining the illusion of unity and strength. They were the ultimate political jugglers, keeping multiple balls in the air while trying not to trip over their togas. As Rome expanded, so did the Senate's influence. What began as a council of elders managing a small city-state evolved into a powerful governing body, overseeing an empire that stretched from the windswept shores of Britannia to the arid deserts of Egypt. The Senate's reach was long, and its grip was tight, sometimes too tight. Their policies shaped the lives of millions, from the farmers in the fields to the soldiers on the front lines, and they did so with a level of authority that today's politicians can only dream of. Yet, for all its grandeur, the Senate was no stranger to scandal. Corruption and power struggles were as much a part of its legacy as the marble columns that adorned its meeting halls. Debates could turn into brawls, and alliances were as stable as a Roman chariot on a bumpy road. The senators were masters of political theatre, often more concerned with personal vendettas than with public service. In short, the Roman Senate was a complex beast, a symbol of both the heights of political innovation and the depths of human ambition. It was a place where ideals clashed with reality, where the pursuit of power often overshadowed the public good. As we delve deeper into its history, remember that the Senate story is not just about laws and leaders. It's about the timeless struggle for control and the lengths to which people will go to hold on to it. Buckle up, because the journey through the annals of the Roman Senate is anything but a smooth ride. In the chaotic whirlpool of Roman politics, the Senate was like an ancient version of Survivor, except with more backstabbing and fewer immunity challenges. The Roman Republic was a breeding ground for high-stakes drama and no shortage of colourful characters. Enter Cincinnatus, the poster child for Roman virtue, or at least that's how the legend goes. Picture an old-school farmer minding his own business, probably cursing at weeds like the rest of us. Suddenly, he gets called to be Rome's dictator, not once but twice, like a reluctant superhero pulled from retirement. The guy didn't even want the job. It's like being dragged back to the office after you've retired to a sunny beach in Florida. Cincinnatus took the gig, sorted out Rome's mess, and then, in a move that's the envy of every modern politician, he voluntarily gave up absolute power. Twice. Cincinnatus is often romanticized as the embodiment of civic duty, a man so committed to the public good that he preferred his plough to power. But let's be real. This wasn't some selfless act by a saintly figure. The position of dictator was temporary by design, a political fire extinguisher to be used only in emergencies. Cincinnatus' first dictatorship in 458 BCE lasted a mere 15 days. Imagine a politician today getting anything done in that time. It's practically a miracle. Yet, while his story has been polished by history to a gleaming moral lesson, the reality was more about pragmatism. The Senate needed someone to sort out a military crisis, and Cincinnatus was their guy. Plus, returning to his farm wasn't just noble, it was practical. Holding on to power too long could have been a one-way ticket to an early grave, courtesy of Rome's notorious political intrigue. Now, let's fast forward to the late 2nd century BCE, when the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, strutted onto the political stage. These two were the original dynamic duo, but their story is less buddy cop comedy and more tragic drama. They were the social reformers of their day, with lofty ideas about land redistribution and addressing the plight of Rome's poor. Tiberius, the elder, burst into the scene with a radical land reform proposal in 133 BCE, aiming to cap the amount of public land any one person could hold. His plan was like trying to take candy from a bunch of very greedy babies, senators who were more interested in their own wealth than the public good. The Senate, predictably, lost its collective mind. Tiberius' attempts to push through his reforms were met with fierce resistance, culminating in his untimely death. He was clubbed to death by a mob of senators and their supporters who were so committed to preserving the status quo that they turned to violence. Talk about a hostile work environment. Gaius, the younger brother, picked up the torch 10 years later, introducing even more ambitious reforms that included grain subsidies and extending Roman citizenship to allies. He was a political firebrand with a knack for stirring up the masses, but his efforts also ended in tragedy. In 121 BCE, after a series of political missteps and escalating tensions, Gaius and his followers were cornered on the Aventine Hill. The ensuing confrontation left Gaius dead, marking the brutal end of the Gracchi's reformist dreams. The Gracchi brothers' saga was like a Roman soap opera, complete with political betrayal, public rallies, and violent endings. Their story underscores a recurring theme in Roman politics. Pushing for change often meant putting oneself in the crosshairs. The Senate, though an emblem of Roman governance, was also a bastion of conservatism, wary of any threat to its entrenched power. The Gracchi's fate was a stark reminder that challenging the Senate's authority was a dangerous game, one that could end with a swift and permanent exit from the political arena. And speaking of political theatre, the Senate's meetings were nothing short of a reality TV spectacle. Picture a room filled with ambitious men in fancy togas, each one trying to outmaneuver the other. Debates could turn into shouting matches, and alliances were as fragile as a Roman pottery shard. It was an environment where personal rivalries often trumped public duty, and where the line between friend and foe was about as clear as mud. The Senate was a place where whispered conspiracies and public declarations of loyalty coexisted, a paradoxical blend of transparency and secrecy. The senators were masters of political maneuvering, skilled at using rhetoric as both shield and sword. They could butter you up with eloquent speeches and then stab you in the back before you even knew what happened. This was a world where words were weapons, and the ability to wield them effectively could make or break a political career. The stakes were high, and the players were ruthless. Yet, amid the chaos and intrigue, the Senate managed to steer Rome through centuries of expansion and conflict, a testament to its resilience and adaptability. The power dynamics within the Senate were a reflection of Rome's broader societal structure. It was a club for the elite, where birth and wealth mattered more than ability or merit. The irony, of course, is that while the Senate was supposed to represent the interests of the Roman state, it often did so with a heavy bias toward its own members. The common folk, the plebeians, were frequently left out of the decision-making process, their voices drowned out by the aristocratic clamor. Despite its flaws, the Senate's influence on the Roman Republic was undeniable. It was a powerful engine of governance, driving policies that shaped the fate of an empire. Yet the personal ambitions and rivalries that defined its inner workings were a double-edged sword, capable of both propelling Rome forward and tearing it apart. The stories of figures like Cincinnatus, and the Gracchi serve as vivid reminders of the complex interplay between public duty and personal ambition, a theme that resonates through the ages. As we continue to peel back the layers of the Roman Senate's history, remember that this is more than just a tale of political machinations. It's a story about the eternal struggle for power, the clash between tradition and reform, and the human drama that unfolds when ambition meets opportunity. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Roman Senate is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more intrigue and upheaval. If you thought the Roman Senate was done stirring up drama, hold onto your laurel wreaths, because their economic influence was just as tangled and tantalizing as their political antics. Wealth and land were the Roman senators' bread and butter, or perhaps more fittingly, their wine and olives. And when it came to power, ownership was 9/10 of the law. In the Roman Republic, land was the ultimate status symbol, the equivalent of owning a fleet of luxury cars and a private jet today. It wasn't just about farming, it was about clout, control, and cold, hard cash. The Senate was packed with Rome's wealthiest landowners, and their economic clout was the engine driving the Republic's political machine. These senators had estates that stretched for miles, with their lands sprawling across the Italian countryside like a Caesar's salad of vineyards, olive groves, and wheat fields. The income from these vast properties wasn't just a perk. It was the lifeblood of their political careers. Without it, they'd be as powerless as a chariot without horses. So, the more land you had, the louder your voice in the Senate. But let's not romanticize these ancient moguls too much. The reality was closer to a high-stakes game of Monopoly than a bucolic pastoral scene. Ownership wasn't just about heredity, it was about ambition, and sometimes outright aggression. Senators didn't just inherit land. They acquired it, expanded it, and defended it, often at the expense of the small-time farmers who found themselves squeezed out, their plots gobbled up by the elite like hors d'oeuvres at a banquet. This was economic Darwinism in action, and the senators played to win. Now, if you're wondering how they managed to juggle all this land grabbing with their day jobs as lawmakers, the answer lies in the patron-client network, a system as Byzantine as a Roman aqueduct. Picture it as a social pyramid scheme, but one that actually worked, for the patrons anyway. At the top sat the senators, the power brokers, the patrons. Below them, a vast network of clients, everyone from freedmen to small-time merchants, depended on their patrons' influence for everything from legal representation to business opportunities. In exchange for their support, these clients offered their votes, their loyalty, and occasionally their muscle. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement, as long as you were on the right side of the deal. The patrons got political backing, and the clients got a taste of the senatorial lifestyle, or at least the scraps thereof. Sound familiar? Swap out the togas for tailored suits, and you might as well be describing modern political lobbyists. The Senate was the original old boys' club, where influence was traded like stocks on the Roman Forum. But let's talk money. The Senate didn't just hoard wealth, it managed Rome's finances, a task that was as glamorous as balancing a checkbook with an abacus. The senators controlled the public treasury, the aerarium, a vault filled with Rome's tax revenues, tribute from conquered lands, and the occasional war booty. They had the unenviable job of making sure Rome's coffers were full enough to fund everything from the grain dole to the legions. And when it came to spending, senators were as cautious as a miser counting his denarii, except when they weren't, which brings us to the debacle of the Third Punic War. The Third Punic War, that infamous clash with Carthage from 149 to 146 BCE. It was supposed to be a quick mop-up operation, a final nail in the coffin of Rome's ancient rival. But the funding for this war turned into a financial fiasco worthy of a Senate hearing. The Senate underestimated the cost of the campaign, a blunder akin to budgeting for a backyard barbecue and ending up with the bill for a 5-star feast. The expenses spiraled out of control, leading to a desperate scramble for funds that made today's budget crises look like a walk in the park. This financial misstep exposed the Senate's Achilles heel. While they could accumulate wealth with the best of them, Managing it on a grand scale was another matter entirely. The war's cost strained the aerarium, forcing the Senate to levy new taxes and dig deeper into Rome's reserves. It was a humbling lesson in fiscal responsibility, or the lack thereof, and a stark reminder that even the mightiest empire could stumble over its own purse strings. Yet, despite such blunders, the Senate's economic influence was undeniable. They were the puppet masters of Rome's financial stage, pulling the strings that made the empire dance. From infrastructure projects like roads and aqueducts to the grain supply that kept the plebeians from rioting, the Senate's financial policies shaped every aspect of Roman life. It was a balancing act of epic proportions, one that required both cunning and a fair bit of luck to pull off. As we peel back the layers of the Roman Senate's economic legacy, it's clear that their story is one of contrasts and contradictions. They were both the architects of Rome's prosperity and the authors of its financial woes, a testament to the complexity of wielding power in an era where wealth was both a tool and a weapon. The Senate's tale is far from over, and as we continue to explore their influence, we'll uncover even more layers of intrigue, ambition, and of course, the occasional economic blunder. Stay tuned, because the Senate saga is as rich and varied as the empire they helped build. The Roman Senate saga, a tapestry of power plays and political intrigue, now takes a darker turn as we enter the late Republic. Enter stage right, Julius Caesar, the original poster boy for ambition and military prowess, whose name has become synonymous with power grabs and political theatre. If the Senate thought it was the be-all and end, all of Roman governance, Caesar was here to prove them wrong, spectacularly. Caesar's rise was nothing short of meteoric. Born in 100 BCE, he climbed the political ladder with the agility of a seasoned gladiator, leveraging his military achievements to amass a loyal legion. And by legion, I mean both his dedicated soldiers and his political supporters. His conquest of Gaul was not merely a military campaign, but a masterclass in how to turn foreign victories into domestic influence. By 50 BCE, Caesar was more popular than a free-grain dole on market day. The Senate, however, was less enamored with Caesar's antics. His growing influence was seen as a direct threat to their power, a power they had spent centuries cultivating like a prized vineyard. But Caesar was not a man easily deterred. His infamous crossing of the Rubicon in 49 BCE, an act of defiance that declared war on the Senate itself, was a bold move that screamed, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." This wasn't just a river crossing, it was a political Rubicon, a point of no return that set the stage for civil war. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the elephant on the Ides of March, 44 BCE. Caesar, having declared himself Dictator Perpetuo, a title that's about as subtle as a sledgehammer, found himself on the receiving end of Roman hospitality. 23 stab wounds delivered by members of the Senate who fancied themselves as liberators of the Republic. And yes, among them was Brutus, whose betrayal added a Shakespearean twist to the proceedings, though in reality it was less about personal betrayal and more about political survival. The assassination was supposed to restore the Senate's authority, but instead it plunged Rome into further chaos. The Senate had hoped to rid itself of a tyrant, but instead it opened the Pandora's box of power struggles. The ensuing civil wars were like a political merry-go-round with no off switch, and the Senate found itself clinging on for dear life. In the wake of Caesar's death, the Senate's influence waned like a candle in a hurricane. The emergence of Augustus, formerly Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, signaled the dawn of a new era, the Roman Empire. Augustus was a master of optics, cunningly maintaining the facade of republic institutions while holding the real power in his hands. The Senate was now akin to a ceremonial prop, much like a figurehead monarchy today. They had the prestige, the titles, and the togas, but the real decisions were made elsewhere. The Senate's attempts to remain relevant were almost endearing in their futility. They adorned Augustus with titles like Princeps Senatus, which sounds impressive until you realize it translates to first among equals. A nice way of saying, We're still in charge, right? But everyone knew where the power truly lay. Under the emperors, the Senate became more of a rubber-stamping body than a ruling council. Emperors like Tiberius and Caligula treated the Senate with a mix of disdain and amusement, much like a cat toying with a mouse. The Senate could still debate and deliberate, sure, but their decisions had all the weight of a feather in a storm. They were the symbolic keepers of tradition, a nod to Rome's storied past, but their actual influence was as thin as the paper on which their decrees were written. Yet, despite its diminished role, the Senate retained a certain symbolic importance. It was a connection to Rome's republican roots, a reminder of a time when the city was governed by more than just one man's whims. In this sense, the Senate was both relic and reminder, a testament to Rome's complex political evolution. As we delve deeper into the latter days of the Senate, remember that this isn't just a story about power lost. It's about the adaptability of governance, the persistence of tradition, and the ironic endurance of an institution that, despite being overshadowed, refused to vanish into obscurity. The Senate's legacy is a mirror reflecting the paradox of power. The more you grasp for it, the more it slips through your fingers. And so, the Roman Senate, once the epicenter of power, became a ghost of its former self, a testament to the shifting sands of political influence. Its story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of complacency and the relentless march of change. But stay tuned, because this isn't the end of the Senate saga. There's more intrigue, more evolution, and inevitably more drama to come. The Roman Senate, once the beating heart of a republic, now an echo of its former grandeur. As we draw the curtain on this historical epic, let's consider how this assembly of aristocrats, forever entangled in a tango of power and ambition, became the blueprint for modern legislative bodies. Think of the Senate as the ancient prototype of a political Swiss army knife, versatile, but with a few blades that could definitely use sharpening. Let's talk legacy. Despite its eventual decline into a ceremonial role, the Senate laid down the legislative tracks that modern democracies still ride on today. The very concept of a Senate, or a legislative assembly, as a check on executive power, didn't just vanish with Rome's fall. Instead, it took a transcontinental journey, eventually influencing institutions like the U.S. Senate, established in 1789, over 2 millennia after Romulus supposedly founded Rome with fratricide and flair. The Roman Senate's most enduring lesson is perhaps its demonstration of the balancing act between ambition and governance. Senators were the original drama queens of politics, showcasing that the pursuit of power often leads to some less than noble theatrics. History has no shortage of political figures who took a page from Rome's playbook, often with less blood and more bureaucratic red tape. If you've ever watched a modern parliamentary debate and thought it resembled a rowdy family dinner, you've got the Roman Senate to thank. But let's not just credit the Senate for its structure. Economically, it demonstrated the importance of fiscal oversight, though not always successfully, as evidenced by the financial debacles of the late Republic. These ancient lawmakers showed that managing a state's coffers is as crucial as wielding military might. Today's budget committees and fiscal watchdogs stand on the shoulders of those Roman senators who found out the hard way that war isn't cheap and neither is peace. The Senate also taught us the timeless nature of political drama. Its corridors were rife with schemes and scandals that make today's political headlines seem like light reading. The Gracchi brothers' bold reforms and subsequent downfalls are a stark reminder that pushing for change can be perilous, especially when facing an entrenched elite. It's a narrative that echoes through the ages as reformers worldwide have discovered the hard way. Now let's address the elephant, or rather, the toga-clad dignitary in the room, the notion that some things in politics never change. The Senate was a masterclass in the art of doing just enough to maintain the status quo, a skill that modern legislative bodies have honed to perfection. For every ambitious reform, there's a sluggish committee, and for every visionary leader, there's a room full of skeptics ready to debate the minutiae. The intricacies of political maneuvering, the alliance building, and the occasional backstabbing are as relevant today as they were back when togas were in vogue. In today's legislative bodies, echoes of the Roman Senate can be heard in the chambers of parliaments worldwide. The idea of a deliberative body that checks executive power is a direct descendant of those Roman debates. It's a legacy that's both noble and flawed, much like the senators themselves. They may have been more concerned with personal gain than public service, but they inadvertently set a precedent for representative governance. And let's not forget the role of rhetoric. Roman senators were the original spin doctors, wielding words with the precision of a gladiator's sword. Their speeches were designed to persuade, obfuscate, and occasionally outright deceive, skills that remain invaluable in modern politics. Any politician worth their salt knows that how you say something can be just as important as what you say. It's a lesson that survived millennia, proving that while technology evolves, human nature doesn't change all that much. As we close this chapter on the Roman Senate, let's appreciate it for what it was. A grand experiment in governance, a stage for human ambition, and a wellspring of political lessons. Its legacy is a reminder of the complexities of power and the enduring nature of political machinations. So the next time you see a politician dodging questions or a legislative body caught in gridlock, remember the Roman Senate. They were the original players in this timeless game, and their influence is as palpable today as it was when they first assembled to debate in the heart of Rome. In the end, the Senate's tale is a fascinating blend of romance and reality, a story of lofty ideals meeting the hard truths of human ambition. It's a narrative that has inspired generations of lawmakers, revolutionaries, and yes, even the occasional dictator. The Senate may have faded into history, but its legacy endures, etched into the political DNA of nations worldwide. And with that, we bid farewell to Rome's most storied institution, a testament to the enduring dance of power, ambition, and the eternal quest for political theatre. You're trudging along a dusty trail that stretches farther than your imagination on a Monday morning. Welcome to the Silk Road, the ancient world's version of a never-ending road trip, but with fewer rest stops and a lot more camels. You're not just meandering through history, though. You're part of a logistical marathon that would make even the most seasoned Amazon delivery driver break a sweat. This 4,000-mile route from Zion to Antioch is the real deal. No GPS, just some good old celestial navigation and a handful of worn maps. And here's the kicker, it's a 2-year round trip. Yes, you heard that right. 2 years. That's enough time to start a family, or more likely, to seriously question your career choices. Let's talk camels, the unsung heroes of this sandy saga. These ships of the desert don't come cheap. A single camel will set you back about 20 silver coins, a small fortune really, when you consider the average wage of a laborer. But your camel is more than just transportation. It's your lifeline, your cargo hauler, and let's face it, your best friend on this dusty odyssey. Trust me, you'll be sharing more than just the journey with this humped companion. Now, before you start romanticizing this trek as some kind of exotic escapade, let's debunk that myth. Sure, the Silk Road sounds like a magical highway of silks, spices, and adventure. But the reality? Think sandstorms that exfoliate your skin more aggressively than any spa treatment, and bandits who are less, Robin Hood, and more. Hand over your goods or else. The Silk Road is less about leisurely exploration and more a high-stakes survival game, where your prize is simply making it to the next oasis alive. And don't even get me started on the infamous Silk Road stomach. This is not some trendy diet plan. It's the very real gastrointestinal turmoil that comes from eating whatever you can find to fill the void. Spoiled food, unfamiliar spices, and questionable water sources are all part of the daily menu. Your stomach will become a battlefield, and the enemy is everything you consume. So why endure this grueling journey? Because what you're hauling isn't just silk, it's the very fabric of economic power. Silk is the Bitcoin of the ancient world, lightweight, high value, and universally coveted. A single yard of silk can finance an army or sweeten a political alliance. This shimmering fabric is the reason emperors and kings will roll out the red carpet, or silk carpet, for traders like you. The Silk Road is the artery through which wealth and culture flow, connecting empires and ideas. You're not just a merchant, you're a cog in the wheel of history, one who helps spin the narrative of globalization long before the term was even coined. As you trek, you realize that every grain of sand has a story. The stretch from Xi'an, the ancient heart of China, is a bustling metropolis in its own right. Think of it as the New York City of its day, minus the skyscrapers, but with just as much hustle. This is where the silk starts its journey, and with it, your adventure. Xi'an is a place where philosophies and religions intersect as much as trade routes. Buddhist monks, Zoroastrian priests, and Confucian scholars all rub shoulders amidst the clamor of merchants hawking their wares. Once you leave the city, the landscape transforms into a vast, unyielding expanse. The Gobi Desert doesn't care about your plans or your schedule. It's an unpredictable beast with ferocious sandstorms that can strip paint off a caravan in minutes. And if the desert doesn't get you, the mountains might. The Pamirs, known as the roof of the world, aren't just a pretty backdrop. They're a treacherous obstacle that can turn your caravan into a precarious line of ants inching up a giant's back. Let's not forget the human element, your fellow travelers. Merchants, soldiers, guides, and the odd fortune seeker all make up this ragtag caravan. You'll learn to rely on each other, sharing stories and survival tips, forming bonds over shared hardships. But be wary, trust is a luxury on this road. Bandits aren't the only ones who might relieve you of your goods. Your fellow travelers might just have sticky fingers when the moon is high and your back is turned. Every night, as you set up camp under a sprawling canopy of stars, you can't help but feel a sense of awe. You're part of something greater, a living thread in the tapestry of trade that binds civilizations together. Yet, as you wrap yourself in a tattered blanket and try to ignore the grumbling of your Silk Road stomach, you also confront the stark reality. The road is indifferent to your dreams and ambitions. It offers no guarantees, only the promise of another day's journey. In this grand scheme, you're not just a passenger. You're a pioneer, navigating a path that's as much about survival as it is about commerce. You're learning that the Silk Road isn't just a route. It's an experience, a test of endurance and wit, where every step forward is a small victory against the vastness of the unknown. So lace up your sandals and adjust that headscarf. The Silk Road awaits, and it's not going to travel itself. As you lace up those sandals and adjust that headscarf, let's take a detour down the economic rabbit hole of the Silk Road, where trade isn't just a means to an end, it's the whole ball game. We're talking about a complex web of commerce that makes modern supply chains look like a lemonade stand. Forget about your local farmer's market. The Silk Road was the ultimate global marketplace long before the internet was a twinkle in humanity's eye. Starting with silk, the OG luxury item. This shimmering fabric was worth its weight in gold, literally. Imagine trading a yard of silk for a lifetime's worth of grain or even a squad of soldiers. Silk wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a glittering badge of wealth and power. Roman emperors might have strutted through their marble corridors draped in silk, but behind every toga was a tale of arduous travel and astronomical cost. The silk trade was a cash cow, driving economies and fueling a demand that spanned continents. But silk wasn't the only star of the show. The Silk Road was a veritable buffet of goods. Spices, precious stones, tea, and even horses trotted their way across the routes. The economic game here was a high-stakes barter system where goods were traded, swapped, and occasionally swindled. The exchange rate, a matter of negotiation as intense as a modern-day auction. A pound of pepper could buy you a house in Rome, while a handful of jade could fund a political campaign in China. This wasn't just trade. It was a sophisticated dance of supply and demand performed on a global stage. Now, let's talk about the wild card that changed the game, paper money. Forget gold coins. This was the future, and it started in China. By the 11th century, the Song dynasty introduced gyrosi, the world's first paper currency. This lightweight alternative to coins was a revolutionary idea that made transporting wealth across thousands of miles a lot less back-breaking. Paper money was more than just a convenience. It was an economic turbo boost that sped up trade and expanded markets. It was like swapping your horse for a sports car, faster, more efficient, and a definite conversation starter. But don't let the allure of economic innovation fool you. The Silk Road was also a political chessboard where trade goods doubled as diplomatic gifts and occasionally as spies in disguise. Empires were like rival chess players, each move calculated to gain an advantage. A Persian rug gifted to a Chinese emperor wasn't just an extravagant present. It was a piece of a strategic puzzle, a gesture meant to sway alliances. On the flip side, a seemingly innocent caravan of traders might conceal spies, gathering intel as they peddled their wares. The political dynamics were as tangled as a camel's hair in a sandstorm. The Han dynasty, the Roman Empire, the Parthians, and the Kushans were all players in this intricate game. They understood that controlling trade routes meant controlling power. And power, my friend, was the ultimate currency. The Silk Road was both a bridge and a battleground, where diplomacy and deception danced hand in hand. And let's not overlook the human element, the merchants themselves. These weren't just traders. They were the lifeblood of the Silk Road, the unsung heroes who braved the elements and navigated the political maelstrom for a chance at fortune. They were the original globetrotters, each journey a gamble with the promise of reward or ruin. Picture them huddled around a campfire, swapping tales of distant lands and discussing the latest market trends. Because even back then, everyone wanted to know what the hottest item was. As night falls, you find yourself under that familiar canopy of stars, pondering the day's revelations. The Silk Road isn't just an ancient highway. It's a tapestry woven from the threads of commerce, politics, and human ambition. It's a testament to the lengths people will go for wealth, power, and the occasional piece of silk. So, as you prepare for another day on this timeless trail, remember, the Silk Road is more than a journey. It's an epic, unfolding adventure that continues to spin the wheel of history. And you're right in the middle of it, a part of the story that's still being told. So, as you prepare for another day on this timeless trail, remember, the Silk Road is more than a journey. It's an epic, unfolding adventure that continues to spin the wheel of history. And you're right in the middle of it, a part of the story that's still being told. But hold on, because today we're diving into the social circus of the caravan. This isn't just a trade route. It's the world's biggest multicultural office party, minus the HR department. Forget the image of the solitary merchant braving the elements like some ancient Clint Eastwood. The Silk Road was a communal affair, a bustling microcosm of humanity on the move. Picture a ragtag ensemble of traders, translators, cooks, guards, and animal handlers, all jostling for space and survival. It's like a medieval road trip movie, with everyone playing a part to make sure the caravan doesn't fall apart faster than a cheap silk robe. Let's kick off with the babel of languages echoing across the desert sands. You'd think you were at a United Nations meeting rather than a caravan stop. Traders haggled in Persian, shouted commands in Chinese, swapped stories in Arabic, and occasionally mumbled in Mongolian. It's a linguistic smorgasbord that makes modern polyglots look like amateurs. If you couldn't speak at least a couple of these languages, you'd better be really good at charades. And talk about a cultural exchange. This was the Renaissance fair of the ancient world, where ideas and customs collided as frequently as the camel's humps. Picture a Buddhist monk exchanging philosophical insights with a Zoroastrian priest over a shared meal of flatbread and goat stew. Or imagine a Roman soldier learning the finer points of silk weaving from a Chinese artisan. It's like the world's oldest TED Talk, with wisdom and wit shared around nightly campfires. But not everything was kumbaya and cultural harmony. When you mix this many customs and traditions, you're bound to get the occasional clash. Take, for example, the dietary habits. One man's delicacy is another's culinary nightmare. A Roman might turn up his nose at fermented mare's milk, while a Mongol would scoff at the thought of a meal without it. It's like an ancient episode of Iron Chef, with surprise ingredients and a lot less kitchen hygiene. And let's not forget the etiquette mishaps that could turn a friendly gathering into a diplomatic incident. Bow or handshake, gift or insult. The rules were as diverse as the people traveling the road. Navigating these social minefields took skill, patience, and a good dose of humor. Because let's face it, when you're halfway across the world trying to sell silk to someone who's never seen it before, a little laughter goes a long way. The caravan itself was a living organism, a community on wheels that relied on mutual support and shared resources. It wasn't just about who had the most goods, but who could contribute to the collective well-being. Food was pooled, repairs made collectively, and protection against bandits organized as a group effort. It's like the original co-op, where survival depended on teamwork and trust. Granted, trust had a different flavor back then, a mix of necessity and mutual suspicion. The myth of the lone merchant fades quickly when you realize just how interdependent these travelers were. A broken wagon could mean disaster, but a helping hand could turn it into a minor inconvenience. It's the ultimate road trip hack. Help others, and they'll help you. Or at least, they'll think twice before pilfering your silk when you're not looking. Now, the social dynamics didn't just stop at cultural exchanges and shared meals. These interactions had profound economic and political implications. Trade wasn't just a transaction. It was a way to build alliances and influence across empires. A caravan wasn't just a line of camels. It was a diplomatic envoy, a mobile embassy of sorts. Every conversation, every gesture, could tip the balance of power or open a new market. The Silk Road was a stage where the drama of human ambition played out, each traveler a character in a grand narrative of commerce and culture. It's a tale of cooperation and competition, where the stakes were as high as the mountains you crossed. And as you lay your head down on the cool desert sand, you realize that this isn't just history. It's a living, breathing adventure that continues to echo in the corridors of time. So, as you prepare to face another day on this winding path, remember, the Silk Road is more than a journey. It's the story of humanity itself, unfolding one step at a time. So, here you are, ready to embrace another day in this sun-baked odyssey, an epic saga that rivals any blockbuster, but with more sand in your shoes. But before you saddle up and hit the dust, let's tip our hats to the real MVPs of this journey, the technological wizards of the Silk Road. Forget your fancy gadgets and gizmos. These innovations were the real game changers, and they didn't need a software update every other week. First up, let's talk camels. These desert dynamos are not just furry transport devices. They're the original multi-terrain vehicles, and the camel saddle is their turbo boost. Were it not for the ingenious minds who designed the saddle, you'd be bouncing around like a rag doll. The saddle's evolution was as epic as the journey itself. By the time the Silk Road hit its stride, the saddle had transformed into a marvel of ergonomic design, allowing traders to haul up to 600 pounds of goods. That's like strapping a grand piano to a bicycle and expecting it to reach Machu Picchu. The saddle was more than just a seat. It was a lifeline, a testament to the brilliance of ancient engineering. And speaking of lifelines, let's not forget the caravanserai. These ancient truck stops were the oasis you didn't know you needed. Imagine rolling into a desert incomplete with food, repairs, and gossip fresher than this morning's bread. Caravanserais were strategically placed about 20 to 30 miles apart, the perfect distance for a day's camel trot. These were bustling hubs of activity where you could snag a meal, patch your gear, or hear the latest news. Think of them as Facebook feeds for the ancient traveler, minus the cat memes. They were more than just places to rest. They were cultural melting pots where ideas and innovations were exchanged as readily as spices. Now let's set our sights on the heavens and talk about the astrolabe. Before you groan and think, not another ancient gadget. Hear me out. This wasn't just an oversized compass. The astrolabe was the smartphone of the ancient world, minus the selfies. It was your GPS, your clock, and your guide to the stars, all rolled into one nifty device. Traders used it to navigate the vastness of the Silk Road with a precision that would make a modern sailor blush. Developed in Hellenistic Greece and perfected in the Islamic Golden Age, it allowed caravans to chart their course using the celestial bodies, ensuring they didn't end up on a rival trade route, or worse, lost in the desert. It was a beacon of human ingenuity, a tool that turned the night sky into a map and made the stars your co-pilot. But don't be fooled into thinking the Silk Road was just an endless parade of trade and technology. Sure, there were goods galore, but the real treasure was the transmission of culture and knowledge. The Silk Road was less a highway and more a fiber-optic cable for the ancient world, carrying not just silk and spices, but also ideas, art, and religion. Through this artery flowed the tenets of Buddhism from India to China, the intricacies of Persian art to the West, and the philosophy of the Greeks to the far reaches of the East. Each step on this road was a step towards a more interconnected world. Take, for instance, the spread of papermaking from China to the Islamic world and eventually to Europe. By the 8th century, this technology made its way to Samarkand, where the first paper mills outside China popped up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. This wasn't just a technological marvel, it was a cultural revolution. Paper made knowledge more accessible, setting the stage for the Renaissance. It was the original information superhighway, and it all started with traders schlepping reams of the stuff across the Silk Road. Yet, amidst all this interconnectedness, let's not sugarcoat the reality. The Silk Road was also a vector for less savory exchanges. Diseases like the plague hitched a ride alongside the silks and spices, reminding us that globalization comes with its own set of challenges. The Black Death, which decimated Europe in the 14th century, has its roots traced back to the trade routes of Asia. It's the dark side of the Silk Road story, a reminder that with every connection comes the risk of contagion, both cultural and literal. Despite the perils, the Silk Road was an undeniable force for change, a catalyst for the exchange of not only goods, but also ideas and innovations that shaped the civilizations it touched. It was a corridor of opportunity, where a savvy merchant could find fortune, a scholar could find enlightenment, and a society could find transformation. So, as you ready yourself for another day on this storied path, remember that every step you take is laden with history, every grain of sand a witness to the ebb and flow of empires. The Silk Road is more than just a route. It's a living testament to the resilience and ingenuity of humanity, where every journey is a chapter in the ongoing story of civilization. And as the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, you realize that you're not just a traveler, but a part of this grand tapestry, a thread in the rich fabric of history. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, you realize that you're not just a traveler, but a part of this grand tapestry, a thread in the rich fabric of history. And speaking of history, let's dive headfirst into the legacy of the Silk Road, a legacy that stretches far beyond just a dusty old trail and a few tales of camels and commerce. The Silk Road wasn't just a road. It was a superhighway of ideas, a colossal cultural blender set to puree. First, let's tackle the elephant in the room, or should I say, the camel. The romanticized vision of the Silk Road paints it as a mystical path of discovery and adventure, where every merchant is a Marco Polo and every encounter a fateful twist of destiny. But strip away the sepia-toned Instagram filter, and you've got a reality check of epic proportions. This was a place where survival often trumped exploration, where the glamour of exotic goods was matched pound for pound by the gritty reality of blisters, bandits, and the always delightful Silk Road stomach. Yet the allure persists. Why? Because the Silk Road is the OG of globalization. It was the first thread in the web that now encircles our planet. Think about it. Without it, your morning coffee might be a perennial mystery, your sushi a far-off fantasy. This was the world's original supply chain, long before the term became the buzzword of boardrooms everywhere. It's a testament to human tenacity and an early blueprint for the interconnected world we navigate today. Let's talk about the blending of cultures, a veritable cocktail mix of civilizations that left an indelible mark on the world. The Silk Road was the tinder of ancient times, a place where cultures swiped right on each other. Buddhism spread from India to China like a spiritual wildfire, carried by monks who swapped saffron robes for the dust of the trail. In return, Chinese inventions like paper and gunpowder found their way westward, forever altering the course of European history. It was a two-way street of cultural exchange, a dialogue across continents that expanded the horizons of what was possible. Speaking of which, consider the culinary cornucopia that traveled the Silk Road. Spices from the East transformed bland European diets into something worth savoring. Cinnamon, cardamom, and cloves, once treasures guarded as fiercely as a dragon's hoard, became staples of kitchens worldwide. It's the gastronomic legacy of the Silk Road that has our modern taste buds dancing, a spicy reminder of how interconnected our world has always been. But it wasn't just goods and ideas that traveled these dusty paths. The Silk Road was a conduit for the most elusive commodity of all: power. Control over these trade routes meant control over wealth, influence, and by extension, geopolitical leverage. Empires rose and fell like tides, their fortunes ebbing and flowing with the currents of trade. This was the Game of Thrones played out on a continental scale, where alliances were as fragile as a porcelain teacup and betrayals as common as grains of sand. Now let's unravel another luxurious myth, the notion of silk as the be-all and end all of this trade route. Sure, silk was the superstar, the beyonce of the ancient world. But the Silk Road was also the avenue for technology, religion, and even pandemics. For every shimmering thread of silk, there was a technological innovation like the stirrup, which revolutionized cavalry warfare, and by extension, the battlefield strategies of empires. The Silk Road was not just a facilitator of trade, but a launch pad for technological revolutions that would shape the world. And what of the roads themselves? These weren't the neatly paved highways of today. They were more like suggestions scribbled in the sand, subject to the whims of weather and warfare. Yet, against all odds, they persisted, a testament to human determination. This endurance speaks volumes about our innate desire to connect, to explore, and to profit, of course. The roads were both a literal and metaphorical journey, a path toward a more interconnected humanity. In the grand tapestry of history, the Silk Road is a vibrant thread, weaving together the diverse stories of countless cultures. Its enduring legacy is a reminder that beneath the romanticized tales and dusty realities lies a profound truth. The Silk Road was as much about the exchange of ideas and cultures as it was about trade. It was a crucible of human interaction, a melting pot where the boundaries of geography and language blurred in the face of common ambition. Today, the echoes of the Silk Road can be seen in our globalized world. Modern trade routes, whether they're shipping lanes, air corridors, or digital networks, owe a debt to the ancient paths that first stitched the world together. The Belt and Road Initiative, often dubbed the New Silk Road, is a testament to the lasting influence of these ancient trails. It's a nod to the past and a bid for future connectivity, all wrapped up in a modern geopolitical package. Yet, even as we celebrate its legacy, let's not forget the Silk Road's darker chapters. It was not all silk and spices. It was also a vector for disease, a battleground for empires, and a place where human lives were gambled like the roll of a die. The same routes that carried Buddhism to China also ferried the bubonic plague to Europe. It's a sobering reminder that with great connectivity comes great responsibility, a lesson as relevant today as it was millennia ago. So, as you ponder the legacy of the Silk Road, remember that it's more than a path through history. It's a living testament to the power of human connection, a testament that continues to shape our world in ways both seen and unseen. The Silk Road is a reminder that we are all threads in a vast, interconnected tapestry, each of us contributing to the rich fabric of human experience. And as you lace up your metaphorical sandals, ready to venture into the future, take with you the lessons of the past, that the journey is as important as the destination, that the road is made richer by the diversity of its travelers, and that the stories we weave together create the very fabric of our shared history. in the dusty cradle of Macedonia, where the olive trees had seen more than their fair share of ambitious upstarts, a young prodigy was learning the ropes of empire building. Enter Alexander, a kid with a thirst for knowledge and a knack for battlefield tactics that would make even the gods sit up and take notice. But before he was the great, capital G, capital T, he was just a bright-eyed boy with a famous teacher. Aristotle, yes, that Aristotle, the one who thought philosophy was the highest form of human endeavor and who probably used "I taught Alexander" as his go-to-dinner party flex. Now, Aristotle wasn't just any tutor. He was the guy who had answers before you even knew the questions. He taught Alexander everything from ethics to politics to, presumably, how not to spill wine while pondering the meaning of life. And while their sessions might have lacked PowerPoint slides, they were packed with insights that would shape the young prince's worldview. We're talking about a curriculum that included not just the study of Homer, but also some serious lessons on how to wield power both wisely and effectively. Aristotle's influence was so strong that when Alexander eventually set out to conquer the world, he took a copy of the Iliad, annotated by his tutor, along for the ride. Kind of like a warrior's version of a motivational poster. Fast forward a few years, and we've got Alexander, now a teen, ready to step into the limelight. His big break, the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC. Picture this. A battlefield littered with the hopes and dreams of Greek city-states trying to stand up to Alexander's father, King Philip II, who was aiming to unite them under a single banner, Macedonia's banner, to be exact. Philip had a cunning plan, but it was Alexander who really stole the show. At just 18, he was handed command of the left wing of the army, which might sound like a parent's attempt to keep him busy, but in reality, it was a huge vote of confidence. And Alexander didn't disappoint. With the kind of audacity that comes from either genius or a complete lack of fear, he managed to break through the sacred band of Thebes, an elite unit known for their fierce loyalty and fighting prowess. The teenage Alexander, with a strategic mind sharper than a Spartan spear, not only held his ground, but turned the tide of battle. This was no small feat, considering the sacred band was like the Navy SEALs of their time, but with more poetry and probably fewer night vision goggles. The victory at Chaeronea was more than just a feather in his helmet. It was a massive political win. This battle marked the end of the independent city-states and the beginning of Macedonian dominance over Greece. Alexander's performance was a hint at what was to come, a foretaste of the military genius that would later make him a household name across 3 continents. It was a pivotal moment when a teenage prince transformed into a leader, with the world watching in awe and a fair bit of trepidation. So how did this precocious young man end up in such a decisive role? Well, like many things in history, it was a mix of timing, opportunity, and a father's ambitious dreams. Philip II had spent years building a formidable army, complete with innovations like the phalanx formation, which was as terrifying as it was effective. This was an army that could march, fight, and conquer with a precision that would make Swiss watchmakers weep. But even the best-laid plans need the right economic conditions to flourish. Macedonia, often dismissed by its Greek neighbors as a backwater, actually had a robust economy fueled by resources like timber and precious metals. Philip used this wealth to fund his military machine, creating a powerhouse that could afford not just soldiers, but also the latest in military tech, well, for the 4th century BC. This wasn't just about might. It was about money and strategy, a combination that set the stage for Alexander's future exploits. And let's not forget the political backdrop. Greece was a patchwork of city-states, each with its own agenda, more fragmented than a broken amphora. The constant bickering and infighting made it ripe for unification under a strong leader. Enter Philip, and later Alexander, who had both the vision and the means to bring these squabbling states under a single banner. It wasn't just about conquest. It was about creating an empire that could stand the test of time, or at least a few centuries. Alexander's upbringing, his education, and his early exposure to command all converged in a perfect storm of opportunity. With Aristotle's teachings in his head and a thirst for glory in his heart, he was poised to step beyond the shadow of his father and carve out his own legacy. Chaeronea was just the beginning, a tantalizing glimpse of the greatness to come. The world was about to witness the meteoric rise of a leader who would redefine what it meant to be great. And all this, before he even had a chance to grow a full beard. With the dust barely settled from Chaeronea, Alexander found himself thrust from the battlefield to the political stage in 336 BC. His father, King Philip II, had been assassinated in a rather dramatic episode that could rival a Game of Thrones plot twist, stabbed by a former bodyguard during a public celebration. Talk about an awkward party moment. Amid the chaos, the 20-year-old Alexander ascended to the throne, and he didn't waste time getting cozy in the kingly seat. Nope, he swiftly consolidated his power with the efficiency of a CEO on a caffeine binge. Now, securing the Macedonian throne wasn't just about sitting on a fancy chair and wearing a crown. It was a high-stakes game of political chess, and Alexander was no pawn. He needed to deal with potential rivals, including some disgruntled nobles and regional governors who might have thought that a young king could be easily manipulated or disposed of. Alexander, however, quickly showed them the error of their ways. He took a page from his father's playbook and executed anyone he even suspected of having the slightest whiff of rebellion. Ruthless, sure. Effective, absolutely. But let's talk strategy, because this is where our boy truly shined. By securing the loyalty of the Macedonian army, an army that was, let's say, not exactly known for its touchy-feely side, Alexander ensured his crown remained firmly on his head. He reminded them of their shared victories under his father's reign, and promised them glory and gold in future campaigns, a proposition as seductive as a Black Friday sale to a shopaholic. Once he was sure the home front was stable, Alexander turned his gaze eastward. His eyes were set on Persia, the colossal empire that had been an obsession for Greek and Macedonian leaders ever since Xerxes had tried to ruin everyone's day a century earlier. But before he could go toe-to-toe with the Persians, he had to take care of a little business in Asia Minor. Enter the Battle of Granicus in 334 BC, the first real test of his military genius on foreign soil. Picture the scene. Alexander, leading an army of about 35,000 troops, faced a Persian force possibly twice that size, though ancient historians often tended to exaggerate numbers like a fisherman talking about his latest catch. The Persians had the advantage of terrain, with the Granicus River acting as a natural barrier. But Alexander wasn't one to let a little thing like geography get in the way. With his trademark audacity, he ordered a direct assault across the river. A bold move, and one that could have gone as wrong as a bad karaoke performance. The battle was a chaotic, close combat affair. Alexander, leading from the front, took a spear to the helmet, a reminder that even legends aren't invincible. But he kept his cool and his head, literally and figuratively. The Macedonian phalanx, a formidable formation of tightly packed infantry with long spears, proved too much for the Persians, who were more accustomed to fighting on open plains than in riverine skirmishes. The Persian army crumbled, and Alexander emerged victorious, his reputation as an unstoppable force solidified. Speaking of unstoppable forces, let's pause for a moment on the legend of the Gordian knot. According to the story, whoever could untie this impossibly complex knot would become the ruler of Asia. Alexander, faced with this tangled mess during his campaign through Phrygia, supposedly took one look at the knot, drew his sword, and sliced it in half. Problem solved, right? Well, not exactly. While this tale paints Alexander as a king who literally cut through red tape, it's likely more myth than fact, a clever piece of propaganda to bolster his image as a man who made his own destiny. Whether he sliced it or not, the knot story is a testament to Alexander's understanding of image and symbolism. He knew the power of a good story and how it could be leveraged to inspire his men and intimidate his enemies. After all, why let the truth get in the way of a compelling narrative? And yet, behind every legendary tale lies a logistical reality that can be less glamorous. moving an army across Asia Minor wasn't just a march. It was a logistical nightmare akin to organizing a rock band's world tour, but with more spears and fewer groupies. Consider the economic and logistical challenges. Feeding a massive army required vast amounts of resources. We're talking about daily rations of grain, meat, and of course, wine, because nothing boosts morale like a good vintage. Supply lines stretched across vast distances, and local towns were often encouraged to contribute to the cause, whether through provisions or forced labor. The cost of such an endeavor was staggering, but Alexander's coffers, filled from Macedonian mines and the occasional sacked city, seemed bottomless. Moreover, Alexander had to keep this unwieldy mass of humanity moving forward efficiently. His army was like a well-oiled machine, thanks to the discipline instilled by his father and the tactical brilliance he had honed over years of study and experience. The pace was relentless, the marches long, and the terrain unforgiving. Yet Alexander pushed forward with a determination that would put even the most stubborn marathon runner to shame. In the end, it was Alexander's ability to blend the mythical with the practical that set him apart. He understood the power of stories and symbols, yet he was deeply rooted in the realities of warfare and statecraft. His early reign was a delicate balance of charisma, ruthlessness, and strategic brilliance, a balance that would be tested time and again as he carved his way through history. And as he marched deeper into Asia Minor, the world watched, wondering just how far this young king could go. Spoiler alert, he wasn't planning on stopping anytime soon. As Alexander set his sights further into Asia Minor, the air was thick with more than just the dust of marching feet. It was charged with ambition, and the kind of anticipation that makes you wonder if everyone had collectively agreed to pretend gravity was optional. Alexander had a date with history, and this was no casual coffee meetup. His next big rendezvous was with Darius III, the Persian king whose empire stretched further than the eye could wander on a clear day. Enter the Battle of Issus in 333 BC, a clash that, if it were a modern blockbuster, would have broken box office records. Alexander, leading a force of about 40,000, faced Darius and his army, which some sources claim swelled to over 100,000. Now, ancient historians did love their hyperbole, but regardless of the exact numbers, Alexander was outnumbered. Yet, he wasn't one to let a little thing like overwhelming odds cramp his style. The setting: a narrow coastal plain between the mountains and the sea, a landscape that would make any topographer weep with joy or despair, depending on which side they were rooting for. This was key. The terrain nullified the Persians' numerical advantage, squeezing them into a space where their numbers couldn't spread out like a buffet. Alexander's tactical mind was sharper than a Corinthian helmet, and he exploited this bottleneck with the precision of a surgeon who moonlights as a chess grandmaster. In the heat of battle, Alexander led a cavalry charge straight at Darius himself. This wasn't just reckless bravado, it was a calculated move to decapitate the snake by striking its head. The plan worked. Darius, perhaps realizing that discretion was the better part of valor, or maybe just not a fan of Macedonian spears, fled the scene. His retreat turned into a rout, with the Persian army in disarray. Alexander had not only won the battle, but also captured Darius's family, a move that upped the stakes and the drama. Imagine Thanksgiving dinner with your arch-nemesis's relatives. Awkward doesn't even begin to cover it. Beyond the battlefield, Alexander's victory at Issus had seismic financial implications. Spoils of war, including the royal treasure and Darius's baggage train, filled his coffers to the brim. We're talking about a windfall that could make a lottery jackpot look like pocket change. This influx of wealth was crucial. It bankrolled his campaign, paying his troops and securing their loyalty. Gold and glory, now there's a combination that keeps an army marching. But how did Alexander keep his troops motivated, aside from the promise of riches and the occasional rousing speech? Well, he was a master of morale. He shared in their hardships, sleeping under the stars with his men and partaking in their trials. In a world where leaders often kept a safe distance from the front lines, Alexander's approach was refreshing. like finding a CEO who actually knows how to use the office coffee machine. However, it wasn't all sunshine and victories. Alexander's encounters with local rulers and cultures were a complex dance of diplomacy and dominance. Take the story of the oracle at Siwa, where he was supposedly declared the son of Zeus. Romantic, right? The kind of tale that makes for a great campfire story, but peel back the layers and you'll find a shrewd political maneuver. By associating himself with divinity, Alexander was consolidating his power, weaving myth into the fabric of his rule. It was as much about controlling the narrative as it was about divine endorsement. And then there's the infamous incident with the city of Tyre, a siege that lasted 7 months and tested not only Alexander's patience, but also his engineering skills. Tyre was a fortified island city, practically begging for a dramatic showdown. Alexander's solution: construct a causeway to breach its defenses. The construction was a feat of ancient engineering prowess, transforming the city into a peninsula. Talk about a home renovation project gone to the extreme. The fall of Tyre was a brutal reminder that Alexander's charm was matched only by his ruthlessness. Through it all, he was a maestro conducting a symphony of conquest, with every note carefully orchestrated to build his empire. Yet behind the grand narratives and legendary conquests, there was a stark reality. The logistics of feeding a hungry army and maintaining morale were constant challenges. His campaigns strained resources, his men were weary, and the conquered lands were not always welcoming. It was an empire built on the edge of a sword, where every victory was a stepping stone to the next challenge. As Alexander marched eastward, with Darius still at large and the Persian heartland in his sights, the world held its breath. This was a journey that would redefine boundaries, both literal and metaphorical. Alexander wasn't just a conqueror. He was a force of nature, reshaping the world in his image, and the story was far from over. The path ahead was fraught with peril and promise, and Alexander was determined to see just how far the limits of greatness could be stretched. Spoiler, he was nowhere near ready to call it quits. Alexander's march toward greatness resembled a marathon with no finish line, a race where each step pushed the boundaries of human ambition and endurance. After the dust of Issus settled, Alexander found himself eyeing the island city of Tyre in 332 BC, a challenge that would test the limits of his engineering prowess and his capacity for relentless determination. Tyre wasn't just any city. It was a fortress on an island, a thorny rose among the thistles of the Mediterranean. Known for its towering walls and formidable defenses, it had a reputation for being as impregnable as a teenager's diary. Tyre's strategic location made it a crucial port for trade and military operations, and Alexander, with a vision as expansive as his ego, couldn't afford to bypass it. He needed Tyre to secure his lines of communication and supply as he prepared to plunge deeper into the Persian heartland. Now, the Tyrians weren't exactly rolling out the red carpet for Alexander. They refused him entry, thinking their island position made them untouchable. But Alexander, who had a penchant for turning impossible into impressive, wasn't about to let a little thing like the sea stop him. Instead, he embarked on an engineering feat that would make even the most seasoned civil engineer break into a cold sweat. Enter the famous causeway, a half-mile-long land bridge that Alexander ordered to be built from the mainland to Tyre. This was no small task. With a workforce that would make modern unions tremble, Alexander's men dragged stones and earth into the sea, slowly extending the causeway inch by inch. The Tyrians, seeing their watery moat turning into a mere puddle, weren't idle. They harassed the workers with everything from arrows to fiery projectiles. But Alexander was nothing if not persistent. His determination was like a bad pop song. Once it gets stuck in your head, it's impossible to shake. The siege dragged on for 7 grueling months, a testament to both the resilience of Tyre and the resolve of Alexander. As the causeway neared completion, the Tyrians upped their game, setting fire to the Macedonian siege towers and sending divers to sabotage the construction. But Alexander, channeling his inner Hercules, adapted. He brought in warships and built new siege towers, towering constructs that would have made a Lego enthusiast green with envy. When the causeway was finally complete, it was more than just a path to conquest. It was a monument to human ingenuity in the face of adversity. And then came the final assault. With his siege towers looming over Tyre's walls like angry giants, Alexander launched a coordinated attack from both land and sea. The Tyrians fought valiantly, but the end was inevitable. When the city fell, Alexander's wrath was as legendary as his tactics. Reports suggest that he executed around 2,000 Tyrian defenders and sold the surviving civilians into slavery. It was a stark reminder that behind the romantic legends of his leadership lay the brutal realities of ancient warfare, a world where mercy was often overshadowed by might. Let's pivot to the economic side, because Alexander's conquests weren't just about adding territories to his resume. Capturing Tyre meant more than just a strategic victory. It was a financial windfall. The city's wealth, derived from trade, and its famous purple dye, flowed into Alexander's coffers like a river of gold. This influx helped finance his ongoing campaigns, paying soldiers, securing supplies, and keeping morale high. After all, nothing says, "I'm a great leader," like a well-fed and well-paid army. But as with all things in life, Alexander's expansion came with a price tag. The cost of maintaining an empire stretched across thousands of miles was astronomical. Feeding an army wasn't just about tossing some bread and olives their way. It required a complex supply chain that would make Amazon's logistics look like a lemonade stand. Grain, meat, and wine had to be transporting over vast distances, often through hostile territories where the locals weren't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. Moreover, the economic benefits of conquest often masked deeper challenges. The integration of newly conquered territories was a delicate dance of diplomacy and dominance. Local economies had to be adapted to align with Macedonian interests, a process that involved a mix of cooperation and coercion. Alexander's approach was pragmatic, embracing local customs and appointing local leaders while ensuring that loyalty to him remained paramount. It was a balancing act worthy of a circus performer, and one that occasionally teetered on the edge of chaos. As Alexander's empire expanded, so did the complexity of its administration. New territories meant new cultures, languages, and political systems, each requiring its own unique approach. The sheer diversity of his empire was both its strength and its weakness. On one hand, it meant access to a rich tapestry of resources and talent. On the other, it posed constant challenges in maintaining unity and control. The myth of Alexander as a benevolent liberator often glosses over these gritty realities. While he did promote cultural exchange and integration, his rule was ultimately enforced by the sword. His vision of a unified empire was built on the bones of the defeated, a testament to the harsh truths of imperial ambition. The romantic notion of Alexander as a champion of unity is compelling, but it overlooks the blood and toil that underpinned his conquests. With Tyre now under his control, Alexander's gaze turned southward towards Egypt. But the path to glory was still fraught with challenges. The logistics of empire building were relentless, and the demands of maintaining power were as ceaseless as the tide. Yet Alexander pressed on, driven by a vision that saw beyond the horizon and a determination that knew no bounds. The story of Alexander's siege of Tyre is a microcosm of his entire campaign, a blend of audacious strategy, ruthless ambition, and the stark realities of ancient warfare. It's a tale that captures both the romance of conquest and the brutal truths that lie beneath. And as Alexander continued his march across the ancient world, the questions remained. How far would he go? And at what cost? The answers, as always, lay just beyond the next horizon. With Tyre now under his control, Alexander's gaze turned southward towards Egypt, and you could almost hear the ancient world holding its collective breath. The land of the Pharaohs wasn't just a strategic jewel. It was a cultural and economic powerhouse with enough history to make even the most seasoned time travelers' heads spin. By 332 BC, Egypt was ripe for the picking, its people weary of Persian rule and perhaps a bit too eager to swap one foreign overlord for another. Alexander marched in, and the Egyptians, ever the pragmatists, welcomed him with open arms, perhaps sensing that resistance would be about as effective as a paper shield in a downpour. They hailed him as a liberator, and in return he embraced their traditions, adopting the title of Pharaoh and being crowned in the temple of Ammon at Siwa Oasis. The oracle there reportedly declared him the son of Zeus Ammon, a divine endorsement that would make any PR team swoon. But let's not kid ourselves. Alexander's embrace of Egyptian customs was as much about shrewd politics as it was about spiritual enlightenment. After all, nothing says "I'm the boss" like a god on your resume. While in Egypt, Alexander founded the city of Alexandria in 331 BC, a name he had an undeniable fondness for, considering how many cities he named after himself across his empire. This wasn't just vanity, though it must be said that naming things after yourself does make it easier to claim them as your own. Alexandria was strategically positioned on the Mediterranean, designed to be a hub of trade and culture, a sort of ancient Silicon Valley, but with more sand and fewer tech startups. It would become one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, a testament to Alexander's vision for an empire that wasn't just conquered, but connected. But the sands of time wait for no one, and Alexander's ambitions were far from satiated. Next on his ever-expanding to-do list was the heartland of Persia itself. Enter the Battle of Gorgamla in 331 BC, a showdown that makes the Battle of the Bands look like a casual jam session. Here, Alexander faced Darius III once again, and this time, Darius came prepared with an army that, according to some sources, numbered over 250,000. Even if the ancient chroniclers were indulging in a bit of hyperbole, as they often did, the Persian forces were nothing to sneeze at. The battlefield was a vast plain, meticulously prepared by Darius to accommodate his cavalry and war chariots. But Alexander, with a strategic mind that could outmaneuver a Rubik's Cube, exploited the terrain to his advantage. His use of the oblique formation, a sort of military cha-cha that involved attacking at an angle, allowed him to punch through the Persian lines with the precision of a surgeon who moonlights as a fencing champion. As the dust settled, Darius fled once more, leaving his army to the mercy of Alexander's legions. It was a decisive victory that effectively shattered Persian resistance and opened the doors to Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, each city a treasure trove of wealth and culture. But Alexander's conquest of Persia wasn't just about loot and land. It was about legacy. By burning Persepolis, the ceremonial capital, he sent a message to the world. The old empire was finished, and a new order was rising from its ashes. Yet, for all his triumphs, the cracks in Alexander's empire were beginning to show. His relentless pace took a toll on his troops, who were starting to feel less like conquerors and more like cogs in an unending war machine. The logistics of his campaigns were staggering, a Herculean effort to keep men fed, clothed, and ready to fight. Supplies had to be sourced from local regions, sometimes forcibly, and the financial strain was as constant as the desert sun. Even Alexander's seemingly bottomless treasury had its limits. As he pushed further east, beyond the boundaries of the known world, Alexander found himself in the rugged terrain of Bactria and Sogdiana, modern-day Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. Here he faced a different kind of warfare, guerrilla tactics and elusive enemies who knew the land like the back of their hands. It was a far cry from the grand battles against Darius, and the campaigns dragged on, sapping the strength of his army and testing the limits of his resolve. In 327 BC, Alexander married Roxana, a Bactrian princess, in an attempt to secure alliances and legitimize his rule in these newly conquered regions. It was a politically savvy move, but it also highlighted the challenges of maintaining control over a sprawling, culturally diverse empire. Alexander's attempts to integrate his Macedonian and Persian subjects, including adopting Persian dress and customs, rubbed some of his compatriots the wrong way. To them, it was as if he'd started speaking in tongues, literally and metaphorically. The grumbling in the ranks reached a crescendo when Alexander's men, exhausted and longing for the comforts of home, mutinied at the Hyphasis River in 326 BC. They'd had enough of their leader's seemingly insatiable appetite for conquest. Alexander, ever the charismatic leader, managed to quell the unrest with a rousing speech that would make any motivational speaker blush. But even he knew the limits of persuasion. Reluctantly, he agreed to turn back, though not without a detour through the unforgiving Gedrosian desert, a march that claimed the lives of thousands and cemented his reputation as a leader whose ambition knew no bounds, even in the face of reason. By the time Alexander reached Babylon in 323 BC, he was a man transformed, not just by his conquests, but by the weight of his own legend. He was 32, an age when most of us are still figuring out how to adult properly, and he had already reshaped the world in his image. But the sands of time were slipping through his fingers. Fever struck, and within days, the man who had seemed larger than life was gone, leaving behind an empire as vast as it was vulnerable. Alexander's death left a power vacuum that would make a black hole look like a gentle breeze. Without a clear successor, because, let's face it, his only son was still in diapers, the empire he had so meticulously crafted began to fracture. His generals, the so-called Diadochi, carved up the empire like a Thanksgiving turkey, each claiming a piece for themselves. The unity Alexander had fought so hard to create dissolved into a patchwork of rival kingdoms, and the dream of a single, cohesive empire evaporated like morning mist. Yet, even in its fragmentation, Alexander's legacy endured. The cities he founded, the cultural exchanges he fostered, and the myths he inspired left an indelible mark on history. His campaigns spread Greek culture and ideas across 3 continents, laying the groundwork for the Hellenistic world that would follow. The blending of Greek and Eastern cultures sparked advancements in science, philosophy, and the arts, a testament to the enduring power of cross-cultural exchange. Alexander the Great, a title that continues to inspire awe and debate in equal measure. Was he a visionary leader or a ruthless conqueror, a unifier of cultures or a destroyer of empires? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. He was a man of contradictions, driven by a thirst for glory that defied the limits of his time. His story is a reminder of the duality of human nature, the capacity for greatness and folly, for creation and destruction. And so, the legend of Alexander marches on, an enduring fascination that continues to captivate historians, scholars, and dreamers alike. His life was an epic saga, a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, brilliance, and the harsh realities of power. In the end, Alexander's greatest conquest wasn't the lands he claimed, but the legacy he left behind. A legacy that challenges us to look beyond the myths and see the man who dared to dream of a world united under one banner. When Emperor Constantine surveyed the sprawling Roman Empire in 330 AD, he must have thought, well, this is a fixer-upper. Rome, the ancient world's crown jewel, was looking a bit worn around the edges, more like Grandma's attic than a global capital. The empire needed a fresh start, a new hub that said, "Hello, future." So, what does a visionary emperor do? He bolts east, eyeing the strategic potential of Byzantium, a city with a geographic location so prime it practically screamed real estate goldmine. Nestled snugly between Europe and Asia, Byzantium was the ancient version of the perfect urban listing. Great views, lots of history, and easy access to major trade routes. It sat at the crossroads of the Bosporus Strait, which connected the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. This was no backwater town, it was a gateway. And Constantine, ever the savvy city planner, saw potential where others saw just another Greco-Roman outpost. So he set about transforming this sleepy town into Constantinople, a name that quite literally put his stamp on the map. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Constantine's decision to move the capital wasn't just about geography, it was also about a little thing called politics. Rome, by then, was a bit of a pressure cooker. The Western Roman Empire was starting to crack, with barbarian tribes knocking at the gates like unwelcome party crashers. Constantine needed a fresh start, a place that wasn't bogged down by centuries of history and power struggles. Byzantium offered a blank slate, a chance to build without the baggage. And build he did. Constantine poured resources into the city like a teenager with a new credit card. He expanded the walls, because, keeping out the marauding hordes is always a good plan, and filled the city with grandiose structures. We're talking massive forums, opulent churches, and a hippodrome for chariot races because, apparently, nothing says imperial majesty like a good old-fashioned racetrack. The city quickly became the Eastern Roman Empire's glittering capital, its streets bustling with traders, scholars, and art that would make even the most jaded hipster swoon. Urban planning aside, the cultural shift was just as important. While Rome clung to its pagan roots, Constantine embraced Christianity, turning it from a rogue religion into the empire's official faith. This wasn't just a spiritual change, it was a political masterstroke. By aligning with the rapidly spreading Christian church, Constantine not only consolidated his power, but also set the stage for the Byzantine Empire's unique identity. This was a place where East met West, where Greek and Roman traditions mingled with Christian ideology, creating a cultural melting pot that would influence the world for centuries. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. The rise of Constantinople wasn't just about visionary leadership and cultural fusion. It was also about cold, hard cash. The city's location made it a trade powerhouse, pulling in wealth from all corners of the empire and beyond. Silk from China, spices from India, grains from Egypt. If it was valuable, it passed through the gates of Constantinople. This trade bonanza filled the city's coffers, funding its growth and ensuring its survival even as the Western Empire crumbled under barbarian invasions. Constantinople was like the cool younger sibling to Rome's stodgy elder statesman, adapting and thriving while the old capital struggled to keep up. It survived where Rome faltered, in part because of its strategic genius, but also because it was willing to evolve. The city became a beacon of light in the Dark Ages, its scholars keeping the flickering flame of classical knowledge alive, while Europe stumbled through centuries of turmoil. Of course, no empire rises without a fair share of drama. The city's strategic position made it a target, and its leaders had to be as crafty as they were ambitious. But for now, let's bask in the glory days of Constantinople's rise, a city that took the best of Rome, added a touch of Eastern flair, and became a symbol of resilience and innovation. It was a place where emperors dared to dream big, and its story, like the city itself, is full of twists and turns that would make any modern saga look tame by comparison. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the Byzantine world, where power, politics, and a dash of intrigue were always on the menu. As Constantinople solidified its status as the new powerhouse of the empire, the stage was set for one of history's most ambitious emperors, Justinian I, to strut into the spotlight. The 6th century dawned with Justinian, a man whose penchant for grandiosity would give even the most extravagant influencers a run for their money. His reign was a cocktail of glory, chaos, and a few questionable decisions that would have made even his contemporaries raise an eyebrow or two. Let's kick things off with the Hagia Sophia, Justinian's architectural magnum opus. Completed in 537 AD, this colossal church wasn't just a building. It was a statement, a flex, if you will. The emperor wanted the world to know that the Byzantine Empire was not just surviving, but thriving. He commissioned the construction with a budget that would make modern city planners weep quietly into their spreadsheets. Imagine spending around £320,000 of gold, yes, pounds, on a single structure. And for those keeping score at home, that's roughly equivalent to about $4 billion in today's currency. Talk about making it rain. The Hagia Sophia was more than just a pretty face, though. Its dome, a staggering 55 meters high and 31 meters wide, seemed to float above the nave like a celestial canopy. This architectural marvel wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a symbol of divine power, a geopolitical flex designed to remind everyone that the Byzantine Empire was the heir to Rome's grandeur. It was Justinian's way of saying, look, Rome might have fallen, but we're still here, and we're not going anywhere. Now, if Justinian's architectural ambitions were impressive, his military ones were downright audacious. He embarked on a quest to reconquer the Western Roman Empire, a task that sounds as plausible as winning the Tour de France on a unicycle. Yet Justinian, undeterred by the logistical nightmares and exorbitant costs, launched a series of campaigns that saw his generals, the likes of Belisarius, a military genius whose exploits were the stuff of legend, spearheading battles across North Africa, Italy, and even parts of Spain. For a while, it seemed like Justinian's dreams were becoming reality. The Byzantine Empire's territory swelled like a balloon on the verge of bursting. But here's the kicker. Maintaining these territories proved trickier than conquering them. The cost of war, both in treasure and human lives, drained the empire's coffers faster than a Black Friday sale drains bank accounts. And then there were the locals, who weren't exactly throwing welcome parades for the Byzantine troops. Rebellion simmered like a stew left on the stove too long, threatening to boil over at any moment. But before we get too carried away with tales of conquest, let's pivot to the Nika riots of 532 AD, a classic case of when sports fans take things a little too far. Picture this. The chariot racing factions, the blues and the greens, were more than just teams. They were political powerhouses. When Justinian decided to crack down on tax evasion and corruption, tensions simmered. The blue and green supporters, united by their disdain for the emperor's policies, turned the Hippodrome, a stadium that could seat up to 100,000 spectators, into a powder keg. The riots soon spiraled out of control, turning the city into a war zone. Buildings burned and chaos reigned. Justinian, on the verge of fleeing the city, found his resolve in the form of his formidable wife, Theodora. Her steely resolve and refusal to abandon the throne were pivotal. "Purple is a good color for a shroud," she reportedly declared, reminding everyone that an empress doesn't back down, even when the chips are down. Speaking of Theodora, she was as fascinating as she was formidable. Her rise from humble beginnings, allegedly a circus performer's daughter, to empress is the stuff of legend. If Theodora's life were a TV show, it would have more twists than a season of Game of Thrones. Her influence on Justinian was profound, her savvy political instincts and social reforms leaving a legacy as enduring as the walls of Constantinople itself. But let's not forget the Byzantine tax system, a labyrinthine affair that could make modern taxpayers feel a tad better about their annual ritual. Justinian's fiscal policies were, shall we say, aggressive. To fund his grand projects and military campaigns, taxes were hiked, causing widespread discontent. The empire's treasurers were as relentless as tax collectors come, leaving no stone unturned in their quest for revenue. Debt and inflation were constant companions, casting long shadows over the empire's golden age. Yet, for all his flaws, Justinian's reign was transformative. He codified Roman law, creating the Corpus Juris Civilis, a legal system that would influence Europe for centuries. His ambitions reshaped the Byzantine Empire, blending Roman traditions with new influences, forging a legacy that was as complicated as it was grand. As we wrap up this segment of Byzantine splendor and chaos, we're left to ponder the duality of Justinian's rule, a time of breathtaking achievements and daunting challenges. The empire stood tall, its cultural and architectural contributions echoing through time, even as it grappled with the weight of its ambitions. Next up, we'll explore how the Byzantine Empire navigated the tumultuous centuries that followed, as new threats and opportunities arose from the shifting sands of history. Stay tuned for the next chapter in this epic tale of human ambition, resilience, and the timeless dance of power and legacy. As the Byzantine Empire sashayed through the middle years of its existence, it found itself in the middle of a geopolitical cocktail party where everyone was just a bit too eager to pick a fight. You had the Arabs on one side, the Bulgars on another, and a smattering of internal drama that would make any soap opera aficionado salivate. It's like the empire was a celebrity trying to fend off the paparazzi while also dealing with a messy divorce. But let's dive into the juicy details of this historical reality show. Around the 7th century, the Arabs burst onto the scene like an unexpected plot twist, bringing with them both military prowess and a new religious fervor. Fueled by the rise of Islam, they swept through the Middle East faster than a viral TikTok trend, capturing regions that once fed the Byzantine coffers. The loss of Egypt in 642 AD was a particularly nasty blow because, let's face it, losing the breadbasket of the empire is never a good look. Suddenly, the Byzantines had to tighten their belts, or togas, if you will, and adapt to a new economic reality where wheat wasn't pouring in like champagne at a New Year's Eve party. To add another layer to this unfolding drama, the Bulgars entered stage left, creating their own brand of chaos in the Balkans. In 681 AD, they established the First Bulgarian Empire, and let's just say they were not there to play nice. The Byzantines found themselves in a tug-of-war over territory that resembled the most intense game of Risk ever played. Skirmishes and battles became the norm, and each side tried to outmaneuver the other with the kind of strategic finesse that would leave modern-day generals taking notes. Now, while the Byzantines were busy fending off external enemies, they also had to deal with an internal crisis that was as divisive as pineapple on pizza. Cue the iconoclastic controversy, a theological brawl that had the empire's religious and political leaders choosing sides faster than you can say ecumenical council. The issue, whether the veneration of icons, those beautiful, intricate images of saints and holy figures, was tantamount to idolatry or a legitimate expression of faith. For over a century, from 726 to 843 AD, the empire was embroiled in this spiritual slap fight. Emperors like Leo III and his son, Constantine V, took a hard line against icons, leading to their removal from churches and public spaces. This wasn't just about religious purity, it was also about power. By stripping the church of its icons, the emperors were effectively clipping the wings of the monastic communities who held considerable sway over the populace. Think of it as a medieval version of cutting the budget of your rival department in a corporate power struggle. But let's not gloss over the fact that the church itself was a hotbed of drama. The Patriarch of Constantinople and the Pope in Rome were like two alpha executives vying for the same corner office. Their disputes, often over theological interpretations and jurisdictional authority, make today's office politics look like a playground spat. The schism between East and West was brewing, and you could almost hear the Byzantine choir ominously humming in the background. It was the kind of slow-burn conflict that had everyone rolling their eyes, but unable to look away. All this internal wrangling didn't exactly help the Byzantine military machine, which, let's be honest, had its ups and downs. Sure, they had some stellar generals, people like Leo the mathematician, who could calculate battle tactics faster than you can say Pythagorean theorem. But the military also had its fair share of blunders. Maintaining an empire surrounded by enemies is like keeping a house of cards intact during a windstorm. One gust in the form of a military defeat or economic downturn, and the whole structure wobbled precariously. Financially, the empire was juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. The loss of key territories meant less tax revenue, and the constant warfare drained the treasury like a leaky faucet. Inflation was a persistent headache. The gold solidus, the empire's currency, was devalued over time, making trade and daily life increasingly challenging. It's a miracle the Byzantines didn't just throw up their hands and declare, "We're done." Instead, they adapted, innovating with new economic policies and mechanisms to keep the imperial machine chugging along. But before you start feeling too sorry for our beleaguered Byzantines, remember they had a knack for turning adversity into opportunity. Their strategic location continued to be their ace in the hole. The empire became a nexus for trade, pulling in exotic goods like silk from China, spices from India, and furs from the Slavs. The Byzantines were the ultimate middlemen, skimming profits off the top like a shrewd hedge fund manager. As the 9th century rolled around, the empire was battered but unbowed. Sure, it had its fair share of bruises and broken bones, but it was still standing, a testament to its resilience and adaptability. The Byzantines had learned to navigate the stormy seas of politics, war, and religion with a deftness that would put any modern-day spin doctor to shame. So, as we wrap up this whirlwind tour of Byzantine Middle Years, remember that this was an empire that thrived not just on military might or economic prowess, but on its ability to pivot and adapt to a world in constant flux. Its history is a testament to the enduring human spirit, a saga of ambition, resilience, and the eternal quest for power and legacy. Keep your eyes peeled for the next chapter, where we'll explore how the Byzantines continued to dance on the geopolitical high wire, balancing old enemies with new alliances and maintaining their empire against all odds. Stay tuned for more historical fireworks. As the Byzantine Empire teetered on the precipice of the 11th century, it found itself in a precarious dance, balancing on the tightrope of history with all the grace of a tipsy acrobat. The empire had seen its fair share of ups and downs, but the next few centuries would prove to be a roller coaster of epic proportions, complete with hairpin turns and stomach-churning drops. Buckle up, folks, because this ride is about to get bumpy. The beginning of the end wasn't marked by a single catastrophic event, but rather a series of unfortunate decisions and unfortunate events that would make even Lemony Snicket raise an eyebrow. Our first stop on this guided tour of Byzantine blunders is the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. Picture this. Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes, a man whose military prowess was about as reliable as a chocolate teapot, decides to take on the Seljuk Turks. The Turks, led by the cunning Alp Arslan, whose name, let's be honest, sounds like he could moonlight as a medieval action hero, had been nibbling at the empire's eastern borders like particularly aggressive termites. Despite having a reasonably large army, Romanos' leadership skills were, shall we say, questionable. The battle quickly turned into a debacle, with Byzantine forces crumbling faster than a stale cookie. The emperor himself was captured, and Alp Arslan, in a move that would make any poker player proud, let him go after a little friendly negotiation. The terms: a hefty ransom and a promise to be good neighbors. Spoiler alert. Romanos didn't live long enough to pay up, thanks to some internal palace intrigue and a coup that left him blinded and deposed. Ouch. Manzikert was more than just a military defeat. It was a seismic shift. The Byzantine Empire lost its grip on Asia Minor, a region that was not only a strategic buffer, but also the breadbasket that fed Constantinople's insatiable appetite. The loss of tax, revenue, and manpower was a gut punch that left the empire reeling, and the Seljuks were more than happy to fill the power vacuum. They swept through Anatolia like a hot knife through butter, establishing a foothold that would prove difficult to dislodge. While the empire scrambled to recover from this setback, the internal situation wasn't exactly a picture of stability. The Byzantine political scene was a veritable Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, but with plenty of backstabbing and power plays. The imperial court was a den of schemers, each more interested in personal gain than the welfare of the empire. Greed and betrayal were the order of the day, and loyalty was about as rare as a unicorn sighting. As if the internal squabbles weren't enough, the Byzantines had to contend with the looming spectre of the Crusades. The First Crusade kicked off in 1096, ostensibly to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim control. But let's not kid ourselves. Religion was only part of the equation. The Crusades were as much about plunder and politics as they were about piety. European knights, many of whom were younger sons with no inheritance prospects, saw the Crusades as a golden ticket to fame, fortune, and maybe even a slice of land. The Byzantines, caught between a rock and a hard place, saw an opportunity to leverage the Crusaders for their own ends. Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, a man who could outmaneuver a snake oil salesman, played the Crusaders like a fiddle. He promised them supplies and guidance in exchange for vassalage and the return of captured Byzantine territories. The Crusaders, eager to get on the road to Jerusalem and not particularly interested in Byzantine politics, agreed. But here's the kicker. The Crusaders weren't exactly known for their self-control. As they tromped through Byzantine lands, their behavior was less chivalrous knights and more reckless frat party. Looting, pillaging, and the occasional siege were par for the course, leaving Byzantine towns and villages worse for wear. The empire's relationship with the Crusaders was a classic case of with friends like these, who needs enemies. Fast forward to the early 13th century, and things were about to go from bad to worse. Enter the Fourth Crusade, a campaign that makes the previous crusades look like an afternoon tea party. Initially intended to reclaim Jerusalem, the crusade went spectacularly off script, thanks in no small part to Venetian machinations and Byzantine internal strife. The Venetians, those shrewd maritime merchants, saw an opportunity to eliminate their chief rival in the Mediterranean trade game, Constantinople. The Crusaders, who were already deep in debt to the Venetians for transport, found themselves pawns in a larger game. In 1204, they turned their sights on Constantinople, a city that was supposed to be an ally. What followed was a sack of epic proportions, a 3-day orgy of violence, looting, and destruction that would make even the most hardened Viking blush. Forget the image of noble knights in shining armor. This was a brutal, calculated assault on one of the world's greatest cities. The Hagia Sophia, that architectural marvel we gushed about earlier, was desecrated. Holy relics, priceless works of art, and the empire's treasures were carted off. The Byzantine Empire, once the jewel of Christendom, was left in ruins, its citizens reeling from the betrayal. The sack of Constantinople marked a turning point, a point of no return. The empire was fragmented, divided into a patchwork of successor states, each vying for control. The Latin Empire, a crusader state established in Constantinople, struggled to maintain order, while the remnants of the Byzantine Empire retreated to Nicaea, Epirus, and Trebizond, each staking their claim as the true successor. Economically, the empire was a shadow of its former self. The once bustling trade networks were disrupted, and the loss of Constantinople sent shockwaves through the Byzantine world. The Venetians, those ever-opportunistic merchants, seized control of key trade routes and established a stranglehold on commerce in the eastern Mediterranean. The Byzantine economy, already teetering on the brink, was left gasping for air. But in true Byzantine fashion, the story doesn't end here. Despite the devastation and division, the Byzantine spirit of resilience endured. The empire's remnants clung to their cultural and religious identity, determined to reclaim their former glory. The road to recovery would be long and fraught with challenges, but the Byzantines, ever the survivors, were not ready to throw in the towel just yet. So, as we leave this chapter of Byzantine history, remember that the empire's decline was a complex tapestry of ambition, greed, and betrayal. It was a time when the chivalrous ideals of knighthood were stripped bare, revealing the harsh realities of power and politics. The Byzantine Empire, once a beacon of civilization, was left to navigate an uncertain future, its fate hanging in the balance. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll explore how the empire sought to rise from the ashes and reclaim its place in the annals of history. The Byzantine Empire, having been bruised and battered by the Fourth Crusade's treacherous antics, was like an actor who had played the lead and found themselves recast as the understudy. But if history teaches us anything, it's that the Byzantines had a knack for stirring comebacks. From the ashes of humiliation rose a phoenix-like resurgence. In 1261, Michael VII Palaiologos, a man with more tenacity than a cat with 9 lives, recaptured Constantinople from the Latin occupiers. It was a moment of triumph, a brief but glorious return to the stage for an empire that refused to exit quietly. Michael VII's reign was a masterclass in political chess. He knew that retaking the city was just the opening move. The real game lay in consolidating power and rebuilding an empire that had seen more false starts than a faulty engine. His strategy, diplomacy, alliances, and a hefty dose of cunning. He mended fences with the papacy, a move that was less about religious zeal and more about keeping Western Europe at bay. After all, why make enemies when you could just as easily string them along like puppets on a diplomatic string? But let's not sugarcoat it. The Byzantine Empire was still a shadow of its former self. The treasury was emptier than a cookie jar after a toddler's snack time, and Michael VII's attempts to replenish it were an exercise in fiscal gymnastics. Taxes were hiked, military expenditures trimmed, and every ounce of imperial silver was stretched thinner than paper. Yet, the economy limped along, a testament to the resilience of a city that had once been the envy of the world. By the early 14th century, however, the empire was beginning to show its age. Picture a once grand mansion now plagued by creaky floorboards and peeling wallpaper. The Ottomans, under the leadership of Osman I and his successors, were rising in Anatolia, and they weren't just knocking politely. They were battering the door down with a battering ram. By 1326, Bursa fell to the Ottomans, marking the start of a relentless expansion that would see them encroach ever closer to the Byzantine heartland. The Ottomans had something the Byzantines didn't: gunpowder. This game-changer was the medieval equivalent of bringing a tank to a sword fight. With it, they revolutionized siege warfare, reducing walls that had once seemed impregnable to rubble with alarming efficiency. The Byzantine military, still clinging to outdated strategies like a stubborn old dog to an old bone, struggled to adapt. Their once formidable navy was a ghost fleet, and their armies, depleted by centuries of conflict, were a shadow of their former glory. Now, let's not forget the internal drama that was unfolding alongside these external threats. The Byzantine Empire was no stranger to civil war, and the 14th century saw a particularly juicy one: the Byzantine Civil War of 1341–1347. This 7-year saga of intrigue, betrayal, and power struggles would make even the most convoluted soap opera plot look straightforward. At the heart of the conflict was a dispute over the regency for young Emperor John V. Palaiologos, a mere child caught in a political tug-of-war between the factions of John V.I. Cantacuzeninos and the Regency Council, led by Empress Anna of Savoy. The war was a Pyrrhic victory for Cantacuzeninos, who emerged triumphant but at a devastating cost. The empire was left even more divided, its resources depleted, and its people weary of the endless cycle of power and retribution. Meanwhile, the Ottomans were watching all of this unfold with the patience of a predator stalking its prey. By the mid-15th century, the endgame was clear. Constantinople was the last vestige of Byzantine power, a city surrounded by Ottoman territories and besieged by an enemy whose numbers were as intimidating as their firepower. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II, a young ruler with grand ambitions and the strategic mind of a seasoned general, launched the final assault on the city. His forces, numbering around 80,000 men, faced off against a Byzantine defense of a mere 7,000, bolstered by a handful of Venetian and Genoese allies who had come for one last hurrah. The siege lasted 53 days, a desperate and valiant resistance that saw the defenders employ every trick in the book. They reinforced the ancient Theodosian walls, deployed the last remnants of the once mighty Byzantine navy, and even resorted to an improvised chain barricade across the Golden Horn to block enemy ships. But against the might of Mehmed's artillery, which included the monstrous cannon designed by the Hungarian engineer Orban, the walls proved as effective as a paper shield. On May 29, 1453, the city fell. The last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos, perished in the final battle, his body never to be found, a disappearance as mysterious as any royal scandal. The Ottomans swept into Constantinople, and the city that had been the heart of an empire for over a millennium was transformed into the new capital of the Ottoman Empire. The Hagia Sophia, that jewel of Byzantine architecture, was converted into a mosque, a symbol of the changing tides of history. And yet, even in defeat, the Byzantine legacy persisted. The empire had been a crucible of culture, blending Roman law, Greek philosophy, and Christian theology into a unique and enduring civilization. Its scholars preserved ancient texts that would later fuel the Renaissance, a cultural rebirth that owed much to the intellectual treasures saved from the fall of Constantinople. Byzantine art and architecture, with their distinctive mosaics and domes, influenced generations of artists and builders, leaving a mark as indelible as a fresco. In many ways, the Byzantine Empire was like an antique tapestry, its threads woven with the stories of emperors and empresses, generals and saints, triumphs and tragedies. Its fall was not the end, but a transformation, its legacy echoing through the corridors of time. The empire may have bowed out, but its influence on art, culture, and history remains a standing ovation-worthy finale, a testament to the enduring power of human ambition and creativity. So, as we close the curtain on the Byzantine saga, let us remember the lessons it teaches us about the rise and fall of civilizations, the complex dance of power and politics, and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of insurmountable odds. History, after all, is not just about the past. It's a mirror reflecting the enduring truths of the human condition. And in that reflection, perhaps we see a bit of ourselves, striving, dreaming, and ever forging our path through the annals of time. The Nile River wasn't just a pretty, meandering snake through the desert. It was the lifeblood of one of history's most enthralling civilizations. Around 3100 BCE, something remarkable happened along its banks that changed the course of history. And no, it wasn't the invention of the papyrus burrito. We're talking about the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, an event as monumental as combining peanut butter and jelly into one glorious sandwich. This merger paved the way for the rise of the Pharaohs, those enigmatic rulers who convinced everyone they were practically gods on earth. Let's dive into how these ancient leaders centralized power and ran the world's first nation-state with a flair that would give modern spin doctors a run for their money. First on the scene was a king named Narmer, or Menes, depending on who you ask. Picture him as the original unifier, the Alexander the Great of his day, without the messy business of marching elephants over mountains. Narmer is credited with smashing the barriers between Upper and Lower Egypt, creating a kingdom that stretched some 500 miles along the Nile. How did he pull off this monumental feat? Well, he didn't just walk into Lower Egypt and announce, "Hey, I'm in charge now." Instead, he probably had to win a few battles, negotiate some alliances, and maybe even promise Lower Egypt a better spot in the annual floodplain lottery. The Narmer palette, a cinematic piece of ancient artwork, gives us a glimpse of his triumphs and suggests that he had a knack for both military prowess and an early form of political marketing. Once the dust settled and the crowns were combined into a double-decker headpiece, a symbol of unity and perhaps a royal attempt at launching the world's first fashion trend, the Pharaohs got down to business. The centralization of power was no small task. Imagine trying to govern a civilization spread across a vast desert with no Wi-Fi. The Pharaohs needed to keep tabs on everything, from grain supplies to border security. This required a robust administrative system, which they developed with the precision of a master architect, or at least someone who could make a mean mud brick. The Pharaohs weren't just political masterminds. They were also the religious rock stars of their day. They claimed to be the earthly embodiment of Horus, the falcon-headed god who had a serious eye for detail, and later associated themselves with Ra, the sun god who presumably had a killer tan. This divine status wasn't just for show. It was a crucial part of maintaining control. By being gods in human form, the Pharaohs positioned themselves as indispensable intermediaries between the people and the divine realm. It was the ultimate power move, a cosmic version of "you can't fire me, I'm your only connection to the gods." Now, you might wonder, how did they get the average Joe, or perhaps the average Hotep, to buy into this divine narrative? The answer lies in some top-notch ancient PR. The Pharaohs mastered the art of self-promotion with propaganda campaigns chiseled into temple walls and statues that screamed, "I'm important," louder than a modern billboard. These depictions weren't just for vanity. They were strategic tools to reinforce their godlike image. After all, when your ruler is a living god, you tend to think twice before grumbling about taxes or grain quotas. But let's not kid ourselves. The Pharaohs weren't exactly celestial beings. Beneath the golden masks and elaborate ceremonies, they were as human as anyone else, complete with flaws and ambitions. They had to deal with mundane issues like droughts, potential rebellions, and the occasional sibling rivalry that could make modern family dramas look like a walk in the park. Yet, through it all, they maintained a level of authority and grandeur that kept their civilization thriving for millennia. In essence, the power of the pharaohs was a complex blend of military might, religious authority, and administrative savvy. They didn't just wear crowns. They wielded them with the finesse of seasoned rulers who understood that power wasn't just about force, it was about belief. And so, the pharaohs ruled, perched like god-kings over a land that was as much theirs by divine right as it was by the sweat of their labourers, ensuring that their legacy would echo through the corridors of history long after the last pyramid stone was set in place. While the pharaohs were busy playing both rock star and deity, their earthly ambitions took shape in the form of architectural wonders that would make modern skyscrapers look like Lego projects. Enter the pyramids, those iconic triangles of stone that have baffled and bedazzled humans for millennia. But before we get swept away by romantic notions of mystical energy fields or alien architects, let's dig into the gritty reality of pyramid construction, an epic saga of stone, sweat, and yes, a bit of savvy economic strategy. The Old Kingdom, often dubbed the Age of the Pyramids, kicked off around 2686 BCE and stretched into 2181 BCE. This was the period when the Egyptians said, "Let's build something that'll last longer than our Instagram profiles." And boy, did they deliver. The most famous of these structures, the Great Pyramid of Giza, was erected around 2560 BCE under the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, known to his friends and maybe a few annoyed labourers as Cheops. This pyramid wasn't just a vanity project. It was a statement of power and a literal attempt at immortality. Standing at an original height of about 481 feet, it was the tallest man-made structure in the world for nearly 4,000 years. Move over, Eiffel Tower, you've got some serious competition in the longevity department. Constructing these behemoths was no small feat. Forget slaves toiling under the whip of merciless overseers, a myth that Hollywood loves but history debunks. Instead, it was a labor force of skilled workers and seasonal laborers, many of whom were likely paid in bread and beer. Yes, beer. Not just a Friday night indulgence, but a daily staple that fueled the pyramid builders. Some estimates suggest a workforce of 20,000 to 30,000 men, each contributing to a logistical operation that would make any modern project manager break out in a cold sweat. Picture a bustling hive of activity, with workers hauling limestone blocks weighing up to 15 tons each, not by magic, but through sheer human ingenuity and the liberal application of elbow grease. Now, the economics of pyramid building, this is where things get interesting. Think of it as ancient Egypt's version of a government stimulus package. The pyramids weren't just tombs. They were massive employment programs that kept the economy humming. With the Nile's annual flooding rendering the fields temporarily useless, the workforce had time on their hands, and the state had a monumental project to keep them busy. The resources funneled into pyramid construction were colossal. The Great Pyramid alone required an estimated 2-3 million blocks of stone, sourced from both local quarries and as far away as Aswan, over 500 miles to the south. Transporting these stones was a logistical nightmare, with workers likely using sledges and lubricated tracks to move them across the desert, an ancient precursor to the modern conveyor belt. Despite the romantic imagery of pyramids as mystical beacons of ancient wisdom, their construction was grounded in practicalities and political power plays. These edifices served as propaganda tools, reinforcing the divine authority of the pharaohs to ensure their subjects continued to see them as indispensable. Yet the reality was less about divine intervention and more about a well-oiled bureaucratic machine. The logistics involved in feeding, housing, and organizing this labor force required a level of administrative prowess that would make any CEO nod in respect. But let's not forget the pharaohs' obsession with immortality. The pyramids were essentially giant insurance policies for the afterlife. The Egyptians believed in a complex afterlife where one's soul needed a physical body or a substitute to reside. Hence, the grand stone edifices designed to withstand the ravages of time. It was less about vanity and more about ensuring a spot in the eternal after-party. This desire for permanence drove the pharaohs to create monuments that would outlast their reigns and echo through history, a testament to their power and divine right to rule. As we marvel at these ancient wonders, it's essential to strip away the myths and see them for what they were. Colossal achievements of human endeavor, driven by economic necessity, political ambition, and a touch of religious fervor. The pyramids stand as a reminder that while the sands of time may shift, human nature's blend of practicality and aspiration remains a constant. And just like that, we find ourselves peering into the past, seeing the echoes of our own modern world in the labor and dreams of those who came thousands of years before us. It's a narrative of stone and sinew, of divine aspirations and earthly realities, a story that's far from over as we continue our journey through the ages. And so, as the dust settled around the monumental pyramids, the Egyptians found themselves staring down the barrel of a new era. Enter the Middle Kingdom, kicking off around 2055 BCE and running until about 1650 BCE, a time of change, with pharaohs trading in their godlike personas for something a bit more, shall we say, relatable. After all, even divine rulers need to shake things up once in a while to keep the audience engaged. Picture the pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom as ancient Egypt's rebranding gurus. Gone were the days of purely divine bling and rock star aloofness. Instead, these rulers tried a novel approach, relatable leadership. They wanted to be seen as the shepherds of their people, the kind of leaders who'd listen to your complaints about the Nile's temperamental flooding patterns and maybe even pretend to care. This shift was partly a strategic response to the first intermediate period, a time of turmoil and decentralization that taught everyone the hard way what happens when you let regional governors get too big for their sandals. Pharaoh Mentuhotep II, the Middle Kingdom's founding father, was the guy who brought the band back together after the chaos of the first intermediate period. Think of him as the unifier who preferred negotiation over conquest, though he wasn't above a little military muscle when needed. By consolidating power and reasserting control, Mentuhotep II set the stage for a period of stability that would last for centuries. It was less about smiting foes, and more about building a cohesive, cooperative kingdom, a lesson in leadership that many modern politicians could stand to learn. As the Middle Kingdom rolled on, pharaohs like Senusret III took the whole shepherd role to heart. Not content with simply ensuring the kingdom's safety, he embarked on projects to secure Egypt's borders, notably fortifying the southern frontier at the second cataract of the Nile. This wasn't just about keeping out pesky Nubian invaders. It was also a shrewd move to control trade routes and boost the economy. Senusret wasn't just protecting his people, he was safeguarding the kingdom's coffers. After all, a good economy makes for happy subjects, or at least quiet ones, and that's half the battle won. But wait, there's more. The Middle Kingdom wasn't just about political restructuring. It was also a time of cultural renaissance. Art and literature flourished, often serving as megaphones for the pharaoh's new image. Statues from this period are strikingly different from their predecessors, depicting pharaohs with more realistic features. Gone were the perfect, impassive visages. In their place were faces showing age and wisdom, perhaps a wrinkle or two, suggesting that these rulers were not just gods, but humans who understood the burdens of leadership. It was a PR campaign that would make even the savviest of modern spin doctors nod in appreciation. Literature, too, played a starring role, with writings like The Story of Sinew becoming ancient bestsellers. These works weren't just entertainment. They were tools of state ideology, subtly reinforcing the pharaohs' roles as benevolent leaders and heroes. Think of it as ancient Egypt's version of a state-sponsored soap opera, where the moral of every story was trust in your pharaoh. Economically, the Middle Kingdom was a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, trade boomed, with Egyptian goods finding their way to the far reaches of the ancient world. On the other hand, the kingdom's bureaucracy was about as efficient as a camel in a sandstorm. Taxation was a necessary evil, but one that came with all the trappings of a bureaucratic maze. Picture officials scribbling away on papyrus, trying to keep track of grain quotas and livestock levies while dealing with a system that would make modern IRS agents weep. Trade was the lifeblood of the economy, with Egypt exporting everything from papyrus to gold. The kingdom's strategic position along the Nile made it a hub for commerce, connecting Africa and the Near East. But trade wasn't all sunshine and profit margins. It was also a source of friction. The pharaohs had to manage complex relationships with their trading partners, ensuring that goods flowed smoothly and that everyone played fair, or else. Despite the economic hiccups, the Middle Kingdom laid down the foundations for a vibrant civilization that would influence the world for centuries to come. The pharaohs' attempts at redefining their image weren't just about public relations. They were a strategic maneuver to consolidate power and maintain stability in a kingdom that had learned the hard way what happens when you let too many cooks into the royal kitchen. As the Middle Kingdom drew to a close, the legacy of its pharaohs remained etched in stone, both literally and figuratively. Their reigns were a balancing act of divine authority and human pragmatism, a testament to the enduring power of adaptability in leadership. Through art, literature, and a bit of savvy economic maneuvering, they steered Egypt into a new era, proving that even the most ancient of civilizations could teach us a thing or two about the art of reinvention. And just like that, the story of the pharaohs continues, with more twists and turns waiting around the next bend of the Nile. Stay tuned. And so, as the Middle Kingdom packed up its papyrus scrolls and rode off into the sunset, the stage was set for the new kingdom, arguably ancient Egypt's version of a blockbuster sequel, complete with all the drama, action, and plot twists you could ask for. Kicking off around 1550 BCE and stretching into 1070 BCE, this era was like Egypt's golden age on steroids, a period when the pharaohs decided that ruling just Egypt was a bit too provincial for their taste. Cue the birth of an empire. Now, if you're thinking that all this expansion and wealth came from some magical ancient lottery win, think again. Building an empire was less about divine providence and more about good old-fashioned conquest, diplomacy, and a fair bit of cunning. At the heart of this power play was a chap named Thutmose III, the Napoleon of ancient Egypt, minus the complex about height. Reigning from 1479 to 1425 BCE, Thutmose III was a military genius who led at least 17 campaigns into the Near East, expanding Egypt's borders from the Euphrates River all the way down to Nubia. His crowning achievement, the Battle of Megiddo in 1457 BCE, where he outmaneuvered a coalition of rebellious chieftains. It was a strategic masterclass and the spoils of war. Enough loot to make even the most savvy Wall Street investor blush. But wait, there's more. The new kingdom wasn't just about wielding swords. It was also about wielding scrolls, diplomatic ones, to be precise. Enter the Amarna letters, a collection of correspondence between the Egyptian court and its vassals and allies. These clay tablets reveal a world where diplomacy was as much about sending gifts as it was about sending threats. Picture an ancient version of the art of the deal. But instead of tweets, it was all about sending gold, exotic animals, or the occasional daughter in marriage to seal alliances. It was a brilliant strategy, turning potential enemies into allies with the promise of Egyptian luxury. And speaking of luxury, let's not forget the opulence that defined the new kingdom. The pharaohs of this era were the ancient world's equivalent of rock stars, and their bling would put any modern celebrity to shame. Take Ramses II, the poster boy of pharaonic grandeur. Known as Ramses the Great, he reigned for a staggering 66 years, 1279 to 1213 BCE, and left behind a legacy that was as much about architectural prowess as it was about military might. His most famous construction, the temples at Abu Simbel, colossal monuments carved into a mountainside to remind anyone sailing down the Nile just who was boss. Ramses II wasn't just about big statues and bigger egos. He was also a master of spin. After the famous Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites in 1274 BCE, Ramses claimed a glorious victory, even though the battle was more of a stalemate. But why let the truth get in the way of a good story? Ramses had the battle scenes chiseled into temple walls, complete with captions that might as well have read, "I came, I saw, I conquered." It was ancient propaganda at its finest, and most people bought it hook, line, and chisel. However, maintaining such an empire wasn't all sunshine and hieroglyphs. Running a vast territory required an administrative apparatus that could rival any modern-day bureaucracy. The pharaohs had to keep an eye on everything from tax collection to border security, and let's just say, not everyone was thrilled about the tax part. Picture a sprawling network of scribes and officials scurrying about like ancient accountants, all trying to keep the kingdom's coffers filled and its borders secure. Of course, with great power came great responsibility and a fair share of headaches. The new kingdom faced its own challenges, from internal strife to external threats. The Sea Peoples, a mysterious confederation of naval raiders, were like the ancient world's pirates of the Mediterranean, causing havoc and forcing the Egyptians to defend their coastline with all the vigor of a pharaoh protecting his personal stash of beer. Ramses III, reigning from 1186 to 1155 BCE, managed to fend them off in 1177 BCE, but not without cost. The constant warfare took a toll on the treasury, and cracks began to appear in the once mighty empire. Despite these challenges, the New Kingdom pharaohs were masters of the balancing act, maintaining their grip on power through a combination of military might, economic savvy, and the occasional act of divine showmanship. They knew that while swords could win battles, it was the carefully crafted image of divine kingship that truly won the hearts and minds of their subjects. But let's not get too swept away by the grandeur. Beneath the gold leaf and monumental facades lay the gritty reality of empire building. It was a world where politics was as much about survival as it was about strategy, where alliances could shift as quickly as the desert sands. Harsh realities like famine, labor unrest, and the ever-present threat of rebellion were constant reminders that the pharaohs, for all their divine pretense, were still just human rulers with very human challenges. And so, the new kingdom unfurled its grand tapestry of conquest, diplomacy, and opulence, weaving a narrative that would captivate historians and dreamers alike for millennia. As we peer back through the sands of time, it's clear that the pharaohs were more than just rulers. They were architects of a legacy that balanced the romantic allure of divine kingship with the stark, unyielding realities of governance and empire. Their story, far from being a closed chapter, remains an enduring saga of ambition, power, and the relentless pursuit of immortality. So stay tuned, because the tale of the pharaohs is far from over, and the next twist in the Nile's winding path is just around the corner. As we march forward from the grandiose days of New Kingdom splendor, we find ourselves at the doorstep of decline, a period that's as much about unraveling as it is about reflection. Behind the impressive facade of golden coffins and monumental temples, cracks were forming in the foundations of pharaonic power. It was like an ancient soap opera, complete with plot twists and dramatic exits, but without the cliffhanger endings. So, what went wrong for the pharaohs, those once untouchable rulers who seem to have the gods on speed dial? First, let's talk internal strife, because nothing says trouble in paradise, quite like a bit of family drama. The late New Kingdom was a time of political fragmentation, with power slipping through the hands of pharaohs like sand through the hourglass. The central authority that had once tightly controlled Egypt began to wane, partly due to the growing influence of high priests of Ammon. These religious leaders weren't content with just playing second fiddle. They wanted the whole orchestra. As their power ballooned, the pharaohs found themselves sharing the stage, a move that rarely ends well in the annals of history. Now add to that a sprinkle of economic woes. The grand projects and military campaigns of the New Kingdom didn't come cheap. Maintaining an empire is costly, and Egypt's treasury found itself in dire straits, a bit like a modern country trying to fund space exploration on a shoestring budget. Inflation reared its ugly head, and grain shortages became the order of the day, leaving many Egyptians wondering if the afterlife promised by their rulers came with a decent meal plan. Externally, Egypt faced threats that would make even the most seasoned pharaoh reach for their stress relief amulet. The sea peoples, those marauding maritime marauders, kept the military on its toes, while the Hittites, Assyrians, and later the Persians circled like vultures, eyeing a particularly juicy carcass. By the Third Intermediate Period, circa 1070 BCE to 664 BCE, Egypt was a shadow of its former self, its territory shrunk and its influence waning. The great empire that once stretched its hand across the Near East was now more like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. As the late period rolled in, Egypt found itself under the rule of foreign powers. First came the Persians, then Alexander the Great, who, by the way, was as much interested in Egyptian grain as he was in their gods, and finally the Romans. It was as if Egypt had become the ancient equivalent of a vacation home, passed around by whoever could conquer it next. And yet, through each occupation, the legacy of the pharaohs somehow endured, a testament to the cultural and spiritual depth that was woven into the very fabric of Egyptian society. But let's not kid ourselves. The pharaohs weren't just victims of circumstance. Their quest for eternal glory often blinded them to the here-and-now realities of governance. Take the infamous Akhenaten, who decided to play a religious game of musical chairs by replacing the traditional pantheon with a single god, Aten. This monotheistic experiment didn't just shake things up. It rattled the core of Egyptian identity, alienating priests and populaces alike. When his son, the much-celebrated Tutankhamun, restored the old gods, it was clear that even in ancient times, some experiments were better left in the lab. And so, what are we to make of the pharaohs? Legacy, those god-kings who built pyramids and empires only to see them crumble like a poorly assembled sandcastle. For one, they remind us of the timeless allure of power and the equally timeless pitfalls of hubris. Their monumental achievements, both architectural and administrative, speak to a level of ambition that's both awe-inspiring and cautionary. Yes, they reached for the stars, but often forgot to look where they were stepping. In the end, the pharaoh's quest for immortality was ironically fulfilled, not in the eternal life they so meticulously prepared for, but in the stories and structures they left behind. From the soaring pyramids to the intricacies of hieroglyphic texts, their legacy endures, etched in stone and history books alike. And while they may not have achieved the divine eternity they sought, they achieved something perhaps more significant, a place in the collective memory of humanity. As we wrap up this journey through the rise and fall of the pharaohs, let's take a moment to reflect on the enduring human quest for greatness. Whether through monumental architecture or ambitious empire-building, the pharaohs remind us that the desire to leave a mark is as ancient as civilization itself. But as history has shown, the path to immortality is fraught with challenges, and the true test of legacy is not just in what is built, but in what endures. So here's to the pharaohs, those ancient rulers who, in their quest for eternal glory, left us a legacy that's both a monument to human achievement and a cautionary tale of ambition unchecked.